And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. It's great to have everyone here. It's a huge crowd tonight for Friday, and this is a very special episode because we are covering a very important historical moment, which kind of takes us on that pendulum swing ride between 1888 on one side and 2018 on the other. And tonight what we're going to do is really get into how the Theosophical Mystery School Society kept an enormous, powerful secret underground during this period of time and how elements of it seem to be emerging. But it's something that Theosophy is not generally credited with, which I find very interesting, and it's going to lead us into all kinds of unknown territory around free energy, the UFO file, and the X Steganography. So, of course, as usual, I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And, of course, Olivia was giving me some interesting details tonight because our story starts off in Jamaica Plain. And Jamaica Plain is pretty close to here, but how long is that to drive, Olivia?
About 35 minutes.
About 35 minutes. So there's a wonderful sort of mansion there, which at one point in time was this very interesting point, this pivot point in history. I'm going to show you this house as it stands today. But in 1899, it was the recipient of some very fascinating materials. And the person who was there was named Mr. T.B. Kinraid, and he was an inventor and a partner of John W. Keeley, who is really the major focus of tonight's program. I should mention that in the second half of the program, we're going to be joined by Walter Bosley, who knows a great deal about the Keeley matter with Theosophy and the Mystery Airships matter, including NIMSA and all the secret society activity around the advanced technology. Now, before we jump in too fast, I want to say to everyone that we're doing a show also on Monday for Labor Day, and for our European guests, we're starting early, so it'll be 5 p.m. on Monday, and that's a very special episode that takes us to Ireland for Atlantis in Ireland and the Tuatha Dé Danann. This is going to be explosive information that hasn't been revealed before, and something that basically I've run across in the X research, and there's some pieces of that tonight also which have never been on the record. So we're going to put them on the record tonight, and we'll do it with the help of Walter Bosley, who'll be joining us in about an hour. In the meantime, get your questions ready, because in the second half of the show, we're going to be doing a major Q&A with Walter, and you guys are really, let's keep the questions on the X Steganography and the episode, because this is going to be an important time to consolidate a little bit of the information we've been putting out. One of the most fascinating things I think that's been going on is that people have been sending me some wonderful, wonderful clues relating to different episodes that have come up. Everything from when we covered Alice and CERN to when we covered the invisible tech and the F-35 invisible tech that Trump talked about, and Trump and Tesla. So we're going to bring a lot of these episodes around, or a lot of that information around in the fall, with added information and totally explosive, kind of off the chart stuff. This episode in particular, I have to tell you that there are some things here that are just going to change the way we look at this period of time, and it all revolves around this house in Jamaica Plain, not so far away, as Olivia has told us. Now, on this program, we've talked on the X series extensively about John Keeley. And of course, the X series is based around this idea of this X Steganography, which is something I discovered while looking at a number of programs that went black during the 20th into the 21st century. And a lot of them were related to aerospace predominantly, and they were related to the early paperclip activity in the United States, where this group of scientists from Germany came over and started lending a hand, shall we say, with the nation's space program and national defense. The trade-offs and the deals that were struck there, and a lot of the things that were kept secret, go deep into the work that we've done on the Dark Journalist show, and with guests like Dr. Joseph Farrell or Catherine Austin Fitz, giving us that larger, much bigger picture background, getting into everything historically from the Kennedy assassination, with guests like Peter Dale Scott all the way through 9/11 and other deep events. What we look at with the X Steganography is quite simple. Steganography is the art of hiding something in plain sight. So therefore, when we're looking at something like cryptography, or when we're looking at different ways of concealing things over time, very often those codes get cracked one way or another, or they're even out there to be cracked. With steganography, it's there for people who know it. And usually those people who know it work in mystery schools, or they work as initiates, or as members of different secret societies. They have to place these things in public sight. And what's fascinating is when we get into things like the Masons, for example, we see them adopting incredible symbolism and secrecy as a way to maintain their secrets over time. One of the rules of thumb that we followed in looking at the mystery schools is something that G.I. Gurdjieff laid out years and years ago when he was talking to the philosopher P.D. Ouspensky, who was his chief pupil. And he said, what to do is always out there for the public, but the how to do it remains hidden because it's always persecuted and sought after. So when we look at these things, you know, a lot of what to do, or a lot of the different things, are there in plain sight for us to get to, but it's up to us to find them. And so what I actually found was they were using this X Steganography in government programs to move secret projects through different government agencies relating to advanced tech, and relating to the UFO file in particular. And the UFO file wasn't always exactly what somebody would think, i.e. an off-world civilization visiting here with advanced technology. It was actually an effect that they were concerned mostly about, and why they had ranked, according to physicist Robert Sarbarker, the UFO file 2 steps above the atomic file. That's pretty major classification. And that's on the record too. So why would they do that? Well, it turns out that the UFO file contained something that was not just advanced tech, but it contained this effect that had a reality distortion aspect with it. So things like missing time, or complete electromagnetic failure, or the laws of physics not operating, for example. That's a big problem when you're dealing with issues like national security. So the way that they decided to handle it on the national security state side was to keep it incredibly hidden, and to really sort of destroy the credibility of anyone who brought it forward and revealed these things were happening. But as it turned out, beyond that aspect, there were all these kind of reverse engineering things that were going on. But there were also moves to find this older technology. So, you know, when we talk about advanced tech, it's not just an off-world thing, and I want to make that clear. The ancient civilizations, and the civilizations that existed in the antediluvian period, had incredibly advanced technology. That's the point that we're going off from. And we get that from the esoteric tradition, which comes out of the mystery schools. So that whole kind of question about Atlantis and other civilizations that kind of rose and fell, you know, as it turns out, there's a lot of basis in fact for it. And some of the major traditions, like anthroposophy, theosophy, and Rudolf Steiner and Edgar Cayce, Steiner's anthroposophy, of course, and Blavatsky's work with Annie Besant, building up theosophy, all take this older advanced civilization called Atlantis into account. Why is that? Do you think they're just doing it on a lark for the heck of it? People have said about Plato, well, he just made it up to tell a story. Well, did he make it up? Or was he just recounting history? After all, he said he got it from an Egyptian priest named Solon, who kept it, and it was already 7,000 years old as a tale at that point, you know, which is already about 500 before Christ. So we're talking going further back and further back. Cayce puts the final demise of Atlantis at 10,500 BC, when the fleeing Atlanteans went to Egypt and just about everywhere else, but making a major new civilization there. So this is the time period that we're looking at. But the effect and the technology and the X technology that's held in the UFO file comes out of this idea that there's an effect that goes along with it. And I call the effect apotheum. And for brevity's sake, it's a reality distortion field, so that the basic laws of physics, the universal laws, don't operate. Now, in the mystery schools, when this happened in Atlantis, the aftermath is that the mystery school tradition was to keep this knowledge secret so that the apothegm basically couldn't happen again, or if it did, it would be under the control of kind of moral initiates or a higher priest class. Now that order got corrupted over time, but we get the idea when we're looking at this that apothegm becomes the thing that they're trying to protect us from. And in the UFO file, it operates in a couple of different ways. That is, the people who are reverse engineering that inside the US national security state, and of course other countries have given a crack at this too, they've gotten to a certain place with it. Okay, they've kind of arrived at a certain place, but they're certainly not in control of it. So therefore, it's something that could easily get out of their control. And then what about the whole thing about the crafts that are flying around that aren't of this reverse engineered origin? See, there are things that are out of their control. And so we see all of these kind of clumsy attempts first to make it such a secret and to deny it to the public. But then beyond that, to go into this whole other area, which is to roll it out in a weird way, as we see now with strange efforts around the government trying to talk about UFOs, with the New York Times saying, oh, there's a threat out there, but we don't know what it is. That is the worst of all possible outcomes, in my opinion. I.e. the CIA in charge of the UFO files, the last thing in the world that we want. Okay, so we've come here to talk about John Keeley, and that's what we're going to do. I think you pretty much get the idea on what the X Steganography is. But basically, it's a naming nomenclature that we have adopted in the government, but it comes actually from the mystery schools in a very ancient tradition going back to the Rosicrucians and then the Egyptian mystery schools and beyond, to that kind of forgotten chapter in human history when there was a massive debacle. So with that, I'm going to get into John Keeley, but before I do, I want to check in with Olivia and ask, how are the questions going tonight?
The questions are good. Not everyone knows to use all caps, so that would be helpful.
Oh, right. Absolutely. That's the best way for us to catch the questions. And there's no question that, you know, if you ask the question once, we'll probably catch it and include it in the show. And the questions have been off the charts great lately, so we really appreciate it. Fantastic people are with us tonight. And what we're going to do is arrive at this little unusual place that I showed you a moment ago that's in Jamaica Plain, but where history really got changed over a century ago. Okay, so someone that should be familiar to anyone who has been watching the X series is John W. Keeley. Keeley's a fascinating character. He is basically the American version of Tesla, including the fact that when we had this, you know, end of Tesla's life and this big raid by the FBI looking for all his papers and information, and we had John Trump, who's the uncle of President Trump, going in there and the FBI saying, what did you find? Did you find his death ray? You know, what about this thing that takes down flying objects, i.e. unidentified flying objects? So we had this kind of fascinating thing going on. And what I was trying to look at was this correspondence. That's 1943 when that happens with Tesla. But what happens with Keeley, it's interesting because this period of time is so essential, but it's almost like the exact same thing plays out, and there's a huge spectacle around Keeley and his technology. Keeley basically developed different motors. They ran on sympathetic vibration, and they're kind of a psychic technology in essence. But the thing was, he could demonstrate it, and he demonstrated it for people like the Astors and even for the Army at one point. So there's no doubt that the technology existed and that he was out there for over 2 decades producing it. And at the end of his life, as he was coming forward to present the technology, something very strange happened, which is that when he died, there was a huge kerfuffle, a gigantic clash that took place over the technology itself. And there were major suits and countersuits and all the rest of it. And his business partner, who had been kind of a silent business partner, but was also someone who was definitely looking for this etheric tech, which I think is the best way to describe it. You know, this was something that was going to revolutionize all the industries. And, you know, they call Keeley the first free energy pioneer. Well, it's true. Tonight, we're going to take a few excerpts from a book that deals with Keeley, and we're going to basically draw on people like John Keel who was a fantastic writer, wrote incredible books like The Eighth Tower and The Mothman Prophecies, and his version of what he thought happened there with Keely. And also Dale Pond, he's done some incredible work, and he carries on to this day with something called SVP, which is the sympathetic vibration. So they're continue to do that and work on his stuff. So here's the thing about Keely that we need to understand. Keely comes up with this information. Major people that have been featured on the X series, like Rudolf Steiner, like Madame Blavatsky, they come forward and basically back him up for what he's doing, and they say, yes, he has it right, and he's going to cause major waves. But little by little, it seems like they get concerned, because not only are these corporate raiders looking at Keely and thinking, well, we really have something here, and we're going to be able to exploit this. Very much the same way Edison looked at Tesla, like we have to kind of keep half of it underground and use the other half for ourselves. They were looking at Keely the same way, but I would say that Keely had even less protections. There he was operating largely independently, but he had a very interesting benefactor who was a Rosicrucian there in Philadelphia, who had an unbelievable background. And we should take a quick look at her. Her name is Clara Bloomfield Moore. And one thing I want to say about Clara, I like to show this. These are the actual stock certificates. And this is the stock certificate that was for Jacob Astor. And you can see he's contributed $5 million. And there it is. How would you like $5 million worth of the Keely Motor Company? Sounds like a deal. The question is, why was Jacob Astor giving him all that money? Astor would show up later after Keely's death, dragging a gigantic contraption through the harbor to his mansion with all of these boats dragging this thing. Airship. Of course, you can figure we're going to get into the airships tonight. But Keely's technology, very much like the Tesla technology, we see the Keely coils act very much the same way. I think the way for us to look at it is that it's largely unknown. That is, even Tesla's work is better known, even though they say that over half of it is something that was never released to the public. Of course, if they had released it, then we'd have wireless energy streaming instead of Wi-Fi, and that would kind of put the oil companies out of business. So there's a method to this madness. What we need to look for is not so much the corporate political clash on its own, but where it interfaces with the mystery schools and the things that they were working to do. Now, on this program, we've covered the efforts of Annie Besant and Helena Blavatsky. Blavatsky brought Theosophy here, and she was born in Russia, and she'd gone to the mystery schools and been a member. But she also was gifted with this incredible second sight. And so when we get into looking at Theosophy and the changes that it made, anytime you look around and you really see the kind of, yoga culture that we have on one hand and the meditation culture on the other, and the Eastern teachings that have penetrated the society that really exploded in the 1960s, this is all largely Blavatsky's influence with Theosophy, which when she came here in 1875, to New York to find Henry Olcott, Colonel Henry Olcott, who they founded the Theosophical Society together with Emma Britton. When we look at that stretch of history, we didn't understand India well at all. I mean, it was occupied, and I don't think we regarded it properly in terms of its history, and it was just starting to come into the public consciousness of Americans and in the West generally. I mean, the idea that we had these exchanges over time, we didn't understand really what the culture was all about. And so coming over here as she was, as a Russian, first of all, there were some political tensions there. Second of all, what she was coming forward with this kind of Eastern tradition of mysticism, was not really anything that people were used to over here. And it took her a long period of time to get the kind of recognition that she deserved for what she was doing. Theories like reincarnation, for example. Certainly spiritualism was happening in America, which was a decision undertaken by the mystery schools, as we've covered, that really started in 1840. That decision to kind of work through these individuals. And what happens is we get when we look at some of the people looking back on that history, like Rudolf Steiner, he gives us a hint of what was going on, that there was this kind of tough decision that the mystery schools had to make in 1840 with the advent of scientific materialism coming upon us. It was a huge cloud over the society. And some of the peoples in those schools, they were kind of looking out and saying, you know, this is bad, because the trend is by the time we release this information to the public will be hopelessly in the hands of the scientific materialism. And what Steiner would call these harmonic forces, which are very much based around having us see things in terms of what can be weighed and measured. And of course, that completely blows away anything relating to our spiritualistic development. So it's a kind of a putting humanity in a cage, and these scientific forces were moving through with that. I mean, aspects of Darwinism also lent itself to that, although there were aspects of Darwinism that were certainly legit. So in moving the culture to this kind of point of domination, the mystery schools had a decision to make, which was which way were they going to go. And part of those schools wanted to keep the information anyway and slowly dole it out to the public. Now, what they're good at is keeping the information, because they've been doing it for how long? Well, for centuries. And after a while, so many of them were just good at keeping secrets that they couldn't even conceive of letting this information out. So it took a major movement in those schools to even get information out through people like Blavatsky. And when spiritualism really became so much of a fad and had some kind of negative connotations, Blavatsky was the trade-off character who could kind of come in and save the day and bring these things out to the public. So her job was immense. And if there are things over time that broke down with her communication with the public, or these different stories about her, you know, it's an enormous pressure that she had as a life mission to come forward and bring us these truths. Now, Blavatsky, in my opinion, did accomplish something, which is that she launched the mystery schools into the public arena. And that as a result of that, if you really look at it over the course of the last 140 years since she came forward, we've grown tremendously in society and in the world and in the culture because of the efforts of the Theosophical Society. And as we know, people like Gandhi, people like Edison, I mean, there's so many important movements and people that have come out of it, including Besant. So, you know, when people try to bring up the downside of Theosophy and say, well, they were, you know, trying to create this cult around Krishnamurti, they're ignoring the first 30, 40 years of what they did. And I really saw the Krishnamurti thing as almost like a Hail Mary pass that they were doing, because there was this idea that after World War I, the mystery schools were failing in their mission. So let's look at how the Keeley part interfaces with this. So John Keeley, being this kind of gifted musician, is orphaned as a young man, and his upbringing is pretty scattered, but he is somebody who has a great mechanical know-how. And in addition to touring with various orchestras and stuff, he will work on developing all these mechanical engineering skills. And over the process of 2 or 3 decades, he will really create something amazing, which is from the age of 14 on, he's quite deep into this, starting off as an apprentice and really working his way up. His life is a little bit scattered. He is somebody who really didn't have a very solid foundation from his early years, and that shows all through his life. But people in his presence sensed an incredible magnetism to him, and his own understanding of electrogravitics, anti-gravity. I mean, it's quite remarkable when you think of the period that he's in. So he starts to develop these various engines, and they start to show results for his investors. And they start to say, well, you know, how far can you take this? And it turns out that in his discoveries, he's very much like Tesla in that one discovery leads to another, but he's so far advanced from the normal culture that of scientific culture that they kind of either try to suppress him or just keep an eye on him or straight up spy on him. Now, his basic idea is that with this etheric energy, we can power all these devices, in that it's kind of the best energy that we can use, far superior to anything they had at the time, like steam engines, for example. But so when he's at a very kind of desperate point of developing this and really hoping for the best that's when Clara Bloomfield Moore discovers him, and it's a good thing she did. This is somebody who was on the same wavelength with Keeley, believing that the world needed this. Let's take a quick look at her. Her maiden name is Jessup, and that's going to be kind of important for people who are familiar with the story of Morris Jessup. And if you think I found some crisscrosses in their background, you're right. But something that is going to come in so handy for us to keep in mind is that Clara Bloomfield Moore had 2 daughters who married into Swedish royalty. And what's going to be crucial in this episode is for us to understand the jump from Theosophy, the mystery school, through Clara Bloomfield Moore, the Rosicrucianist, who was living in Philadelphia at the same time as Keeley, but moved to London, and her 2 daughters joining with Swedish royalty, including that whole bloodline that, you know, seen several Swedish prime ministers, and very much active in Swedish politics even today. So we're looking at something kind of remarkable with Clara Bloomfield Moore. She's a key figure and certainly key to the survival of Keeley and the understanding.
Are you going to mention who else is in that bloodline now?
I certainly could. You know, what's interesting, I have it here, and people might find this kind of remarkable, but here we have in this bloodline for Clara Sophia Jessup, Ella Carleton Moore, and Count Carl Gustav von Rosen, which is where her daughter will marry, von Rosen. This is John Kerry's bloodline, who is the former Secretary of State, presidential candidate, and senator from Massachusetts for many years. As it turns out, Clara Bloomfield Moore is a descendant of the Winthrops of Boston. And, you know, it just so happens that the Winthrops had a great role in setting up Harvard and setting up everything around Boston. Actually, Olivia, when we knock around Boston, everything is Winthrop this and Winthrop that.
The town of Winthrop? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Hey, did I tell you, oddly enough, I found Anthony Perkins in that bloodline, so figure that out.
Are you going to mention the Dulleses?
Yeah, well, that's next.
Okay.
You see, you're doing well. You're so far ahead of me. I don't
want
know.
you to forget. There's so much to remember.
Do you want to? You can take over the show. You can actually finish the next segment. You can do it. And I'm sure it would be a fascinating show if you did. I'm actually looking forward to it. So where was I? The Dulles brothers. Okay, so we're all familiar with the CIA director, Allen Dulles, and his brother, John Foster Dulles, who is the Secretary of State. Now, the way that I look at it is, you know, their role in history, something relating to the Kennedy assassination. You know, basically, Dulles was the architect of the Kennedy assassination. So those roots run really, really deep. He's right in here, oddly enough. Allen and John Foster Dulles. Let's see if you can pick that up. They're both right here. That is a family background document. There's no disputing it. John Kerry has the Dulles brothers in his background, but more importantly, in the background of John Kerry is Clara Bloomfield Moore and her 2 daughters who marry this Swedish royalty. Let's bring all this around, but let's remember these key factors. The mystery schools, moving through Blavatsky, moving Theosophy out there. The mystery schools moving through the Rosicrucians, which Bloomfield Moore was. The mystery schools taking a long look at what Keeley was doing, and through Clara Bloomfield Moore supporting him financially. And then another aspect, a kind of corporate aspect, which is the Astor family, coming in and also supporting him financially to the tune of $5 million. How much money do you think that was back then, Olivia?
God, I can't even imagine.
Let's think about that.
Well, you're the mathematician.
I would say you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of like $50 million. Mm-hmm. Easy. But when we look at these political figures in that bloodline of what's about to take place here, everything makes a lot more sense. So we're not hunting for political figures. They're popping up there. They're just there. It's not even something that we're making a central focus on all this. And I want to remind everyone, while I get into the next segment of showing exactly where the Bloomfield Moore story leads, that I want you to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter is a free newsletter. It keeps us in touch with each other. And that's kind of the easiest, best way for us to stay in touch after the incredible shakedown of social media in what I'm calling crackdown summer that we've seen from the top to the bottom. I mean, it's amazing the channels that they've taken out. And Olivia and I have been discussing this. This is a remarkable move by these companies to come out so blatantly, you know. And for them to do that kind of censorship well, all I can say is the best way for us to fight it is to stay in touch with each other. So let's go ahead and do that. You can find it at darkjournalist.com. And you just subscribe there. If you want to go deeper, subscribe to the site. We're going to give you more material. There's going to be more X material and more interviews and more things than you can imagine in the fall. This is the perfect time to join us and really get behind the work that we're doing. Just like, you know, that's what I'm doing, basically. I'm getting behind the good stuff that I'm finding in the alternative world and in the alternative media. And there's a lot of it. There is a lot of it. You have to really kind of weed through the junk, but there's certainly the good stuff. And when you find it, support it, get behind it, you know, get behind the Dark Journalist show, become a subscriber. That's the way you can kind of
be empowered.
Yeah,
right?
And you're getting what it is, and we've been doing it. We've been picking out things and supporting them because it's a way to be involved directly. It gives you, you know, it's saying I'm standing up for the stuff that I know that is good, that I'm learning from. And those things that take away from us so often on a regular basis in the media, you know, there's only one way to stand up to them, and that is to kind of get together and pull this information and do our best with it, which I have to say that I am seeing, you know, more and more that people want a role. They want to take charge of the situation. And my feeling is, you know, that there's no room for procrastination. So let's get behind the stuff that's giving us back. And that's what we try to do on this show. But definitely go to Dark Journalist, because that's going to be where you'll find all that information. Okay. Claire Bloomfield Moore. The name just rolls off the tongue. Let's find out now who Claire Bloomfield Moore kind of married her daughters off to. Quite fascinating. The von Rosen family in Sweden has always held these incredibly high positions. They've been entrenched in Swedish politics for centuries. And Count Eric von Rosen is a remarkable figure because he's someone who became very active as an explorer. They call him an ethnographer, patron, you know, Swedish, prominent figure in the Swedish upper class. Let's take a look at him, actually. He's a pretty kind of focused looking guy. Well, as it turned out, he's the son of Bloomfield Moore's daughter. So she actually, Bloomfield Moore's daughter, who I have somewhere here, Clara Jessup, her name is Ella Carlton Moore, and she was born in Philadelphia. And she actually married Count Carl Gustav von Rosen, which was his dad. And this, you know, they had Eric von Rosen, who's a very prominent figure in World War I and World War II, and we'll get around to that. Now, von Rosen has some very interesting things to his credit, and they're quite odd. First of all, his sister-in-law became the wife of Hermann Goering, who was, of course, an incredible, powerful Nazi figure who was in charge of the Luftwaffe. Now, this is a picture of them together, and this is how the Nazis get a stronghold working with the Rosen family. Now, this is a better shot, actually. It's Karen Goering. And she's a remarkable woman, also apparently possessed of some interesting psychic abilities herself, and we're going to touch on that. But to give us this idea now that Goering was actually von Rosen's pilot, so we're getting that kind of, you know, all in the family idea. And this is before he joined the Nazis, but it will come in very, very handy. There's something known as the von Rosen swastika. I'm going to show it here. There's a couple of different ones. I want to get the right one. Hold on just a second. Yeah, well, this was the original design, as you can see. Now, this is 1913. Okay, so instead of right off the bat us thinking, wow, he's making a Nazi symbol. 1913 wasn't the case, but there he is decorating his planes with it. Now, he had this affinity for this symbol, oddly enough. Interestingly enough, he will move. If we look at a company that was in Sweden at the time, they were using the swastika, but they're an electrical power company, and they've been using the symbol basically since about 1903. That's actually it looks like a swastika chandelier, and electric armature, that basically means electrical engineering for your home. This is a model of von Rosen's plane that he donated to the Finnish Air Force to create the Finnish Air Force, and without him, there would be no Finnish Air Force. Now, he's the Count from Sweden. However, when we're looking at these forces coming together just prior to World War I, World War II, we're developing alliances. By the end, Finland will be against Soviet Russia in World War II, but then they'll be working kind of with the Nazis there to defeat the Russians, but then they turn, because the Nazis encroach in their space, and they turn against the Russians. So there's this whole rigmarole that goes on. So they're for and against, but at the root of all this is this strange Air Force with these symbols put up there by Erich von Rosen. Now, why is Erich von Rosen, a member of Swedish upper class government society, so obsessed with the swastika? It's very interesting. Well, we're going to answer that question. Let's take a look at a couple of things here. Remember now, he is the grandson of Claire Bloomfield Moore, who we started off with Keeley. Now, one thing I should mention here is that when Keeley died, and I'll finish the story about what happened with his business partner, but Keeley didn't leave his equipment to his wife. He left it to his business partner, this unusual scientist from Boston, who lived in that house in Jamaica Plain that we started the show off with. Excuse me. So, as it turned out, these forces that were trying to get their hands on the Keeley technology decide the business partner is the one we need to target. He was a very hard guy to get a hold of. He kept himself very under wraps. So they decide, you know what we're going to do? We're going to set up a whole thing saying that Keeley's work was bogus, that he was a complete fraud, and then we're going to have the shareholders sue this guy and Keeley's widow. So these forces get together and they do that. And basically, this guy gets back to Boston after a Kinraid. He gets back to Boston and he says, what is going on here? I'm basically being dragged through the coals. Long story short, he packs up the entire warehouse of Keeley materials and sends it off to London. For a long time, there are all these questions about where that went. What we found out through people on the Theosophical side, like Mabel Collins, is that it went to Annie Besant, as we described in an episode dealing with Annie Besant. Now, Besant had an opportunity and a choice there. She could have, kind of developed the technology, or, she saw a number of risks with it. And what I should kind of preface this whole thing with is Blavatsky said, although she knew that Keeley was legit, she said the things that he was tapping into. I'm actually going to read her quote because it's a little bit crucial to understanding. Quote, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. John Keeley's discovery would lead to a knowledge of one of the most occult secrets, a secret which can never be allowed to fall into the hands of the masses to be manipulated. Now, what she's saying is, if it gets out there in the public, the corporate raiders come in, they pick up the technology, they repress the public with it. Whatever was in the essence of this etheric technology that Keeley was bringing forward, much like Nikola Tesla was bringing forward. The public probably was ready for it, but the corporate raiders and the controllers in the political system, as we saw with their repression of Tesla's technology, they had different ideas. Interestingly enough, he said that it was etheric energy that this ran on, sympathetic vibration energy. Here's what she had to say about that. What is the primordial chaos but ether? The modern ether, not such as is recognized by our scientists, but such as it was known to ancient philosophers, ether, with all its mysterious and occult properties, containing in itself the germs of universal creation, giving us the hint that this is something he had tapped into. You know, when we look at the CERN Hadron Collider, the particle collider, and what they're doing, they're trying to create what? The Big Bang. There it is. The germs of universal creation. So this technology is touching on the same thing. And she's saying once they get their hands on that, they can basically divide and rule the planet. So she's saying, she's representing the mystery school position as, we can't let that technology out either. So Blavatsky, along with Colonel Olcott, devise a method whereby they will hide the technology. And it's interesting when we think about it, because Blavatsky is somebody who had an incredibly high moral character and had done things along the lines of, you know, worked for girls, women's suffrage, women's rights. You know, she had seen all of these sort of 14 to 16-year-old girls working in these factories and developing these ailments because they were getting affected by the chemicals there. And she started all these strikes against these companies and took an incredible amount of heat for it. So this is a remarkable person who helped with Ireland home rule and basically formed Gandhi, you know, gave him all the tools that he needed to come in during this period in India and develop home rule and throw the British out. So she's a dynamic, true character with a major moral agenda. And when this situation comes up and she's given the choice to kind of publicize and get behind the Keeley technology after he dies, it's that echo of Blavatsky's word, where Blavatsky said the mystery schools won't let it out. It doesn't matter that the corporations want to repress it and grab it for themselves. The mystery schools won't let it out. So Besant makes the choice then to hide the technology, in essence. And this is kind of a crucial, pivotal decision that gets made. But remember, it all happens because Keeley dies, and then it falls to the business partner. And the business partner at that lovely Jamaica Plain mansion we were just looking at, take another look at it, because it's on Spring Street. It's quite a unique place there, built in the 1880s. He makes a very interesting decision. And the people around him are like, what are you doing? What is the stuff you're packing up? Completely silent about it. But he shipped it off just when he knew they were going to get their hands on it, and they were going to say, oh, you know, let's keep it in escrow because the shareholders are suing the Keeley estate. That technology disappears. It's off the map, and you won't hear from it again. The major people who get behind the Keeley story and try to find out what happened there, what they do is they come forward and they have to piece together, literally, news articles to try to figure out what technology that Keeley was working with, because there are no decent blueprints from what he was doing. All of that stuff got shipped off to Annie Besant, and thank God it did, because it was about to fall into the hands of the kind of Westinghouses and the J.P. Morgans of the day. So it was a crucial move, probably a very tough decision on the part of the mystery school of Theosophy. Now, going back now for a moment, remember Claire Bloomfield Moore was the major benefactress to Keeley. And now her daughter has married this Swedish count, and their son is Eric von Rosen, who's developed this incredible identification with the symbol that he's seen in his travels, including South America, of this swastika. But if we go back and we look at Theosophy and how they understood it, as the Indian cultures understood the swastika, as a major sun symbol, a transformation symbol, even a good luck symbol. In fact, in Sanskrit, it is good. It means good fortune or fortune. So we can see in the early version of the Theosophical logo, that is a stylized X, that is the swastika.
I have to say, I'm so bummed out. I know that the audience is going to feel similarly
That we lost the symbol
that
to the Nazis.
ruined these great
Yes,
symbols.
it is.
You know, because
It's
you
tough.
feel the power in them, and
There's
to
no
be able
question.
to use them for good, would be wonderful.
Well, it's an interesting thing because I can clearly see that the mystery schools were moving the symbol forward. This is the conclusion that we came to. But I share your grief. How are you doing over there, Miss Olivia?
Good, but it pisses me off.
I can appreciate it. Just wait. In the second half of the show, you're going to go even worse. All right. This early Theosophical emblem contains the X on the top, which is what the swastika would morph into. This represents, in my opinion, the X Steganography, saying we are maintaining the tradition of moving this information through the mystery schools. And Theosophy is the effort to let the X information out to the public over time. The X information, by the way, will have there's an incredible war that goes on in the 20th century about it. And we're going to try to touch on that here. But just to kind of recap now, here's the situation. John Keeley was this inventor. He developed an etheric energy motor. By the way, when he demonstrated it for the Army, they said that it went to 500 miles per hour. He was talking about space travel with it at that period of time. And in fact, John Jacob Astor, who was another benefactor of his, and Jacob Astor is incredibly important character who actually was writing sci-fi books about living on Jupiter. I mean, this guy was really tuned in, and he wrote a book about 2100. And if you read the book, it's kind of like we're talking about, he's seeing the future. It's quite remarkable, actually.
I'm going to interrupt right now.
Yeah.
Najat said something fascinating.
Uh-huh.
She says, maybe that was intentional to keep the secret hidden if it's perceived as evil.
Oh, to keep the swastika?
Yes. So if the
I don't know if anybody could control what the Nazis were doing with it, but yeah, I see what you mean. Just give it the connotation.
If the New Age was bringing out this new information and a new era, more open, more enlightened, more access to higher realms, and the Nazis came and subverted it, it was so that we couldn't access that symbol and what it represented for our own growth, for our own potential.
It's no question that because of its association with the Nazis, it's forever sullied.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, why were the Nazis using it in the first place? They obviously understood it from the mystery school side. What mystery school was informing them? We know that there were a couple, and we're going to touch on both of them tonight and why they're significant in this. But those are great questions. And we're going to take a whole bevy of questions before we're done tonight. So we've seen Count von Rosen and his Nazi plane. We've seen that Hermann Goering was his pilot, and we've seen that Goering, when he's staying over there at the von Rosen mansion, he runs across Eric's sister-in-law, and they get married. And it's quite remarkable that as Goering rises, it puts pressure on this whole family because not the entire family is into the Nazi rise, but it seems like Eric, with his adoption of the swastika, was a totally different thing before all this World War I, World War II stuff happens. Okay, this is the emblem of the Black Sun adopted by the Thule Society. By the way, contemporary German federal law forbids it to be displayed. This is something that's very well explored in Joseph Farrell's book called Reich of the Black Sun. So in encapsulated form, let's just take a look at it. Obviously, the X technology, the X secret, is embodied right in the center of the symbol, which I find quite remarkable. But the Thule Society would become the mystical backdrop for the rise of the Nazi movement because they were contemporaries. Now, by the way, this leads us to that question of, how does National Socialism feel about Rudolf Steiner? It was quite remarkable because Steiner developed the Goetheanum, which was this incredible building. You've never seen anything like it. I don't have a picture of it handy. And their response was to burn it down. And they didn't like the competition, as it were. They were like, let's get rid of these people who know things and are representing the mystery schools. And their rise, Steiner saw as a threat. So, Steiner died in 25 before they really kicked in, but they had the beer hall putsch by then. But there's no doubt about it that this is kind of a war of secret societies taking place in the run-up to the bloodbath of World War II. So we're getting this idea. Something else I wanted to mention about this, which is the person who painted the swastikas on the plane for von Rosen, said that von Rosen didn't want to leave him a model and say, here, paint it this way. What he did was he laid his arms out in the swastika symbol on both sides and told him, this is how you paint it. I have a feeling when I look at this, it's a very unusual thing, and it tells me, if you know anything about the deeper mystery schools and the traditions that they have, many of the things they do compose of using your hands and arms and gestures to create an alphabet. Obviously, von Rosen, unless this is just some weird kind of inspiration that he had, which I don't think it was, laying out his arms in the formation of the two swastikas on the plane wings definitely means that he understood the mystery school movement aspect of how that was significant, in my opinion. But let's cast the net a little wider about why the swastika is showing up in this way, and it seems like the mystery schools are going to let out this secret of what the swastika represents, and somehow that gets gobbled up by the repression of the National Socialist Party, which becomes the Nazis, and they use it, and it becomes forever identified as the emblem for them. Of course, you're going to find the X crisscrossing with the swastika. There's just no denying it as a symbol. But let's look somewhere else where this swastika is showing up, and then jump back into Erich von Rosen and his grandmother, Claire Bloomfield Moore, who was the supporter of Keeley. Because what we're going to find out is that the Keeley technology, although Annie Besant was able to get the majority of it from Keeley's business partner, whatever was left came directly from Clara Bloomfield Moore to her daughters and the Swedish royal family that they married into. It's quite fascinating, and we're going to show how that went down. But first, where else did that swastika show up? Well, here we're going to take a left turn, and this is going to be pretty wild. I know that many of you who are into poetry are very familiar with the various poets, but let's kind of get our heads wrapped around Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling is this incredible, celebrated poet of British ancestry, but born in India. Just a remarkable, incredible poems like My Boy Jack, Gunga Din, and there's that great one. I can't think of the title, but it's Olivia. What is that one? It's If You Can Keep Your Head About You, You'll Be a Man, My Son.
You know this better than I do.
Exactly. So Kipling and his incredible influence, he's one of the most important figures in that period, along with Charles Dickens and Mark Twain. I mean, these are the real giants. Now, as I've shown on this program, the royalty in Britain, along with the kind of glitterati and the upper echelon of artists and literary figures, were associated with something called the Orphic Circle. We get that information from Emma Britton, who's one of the founding members of the Theosophical Society, but she was in it. And what they did was they raised her up as a girl. And Blavatsky had said about her that she was one of the best trance mediums that she had ever encountered. And we've done a couple of shows now on Emma Britton, so I hope you guys are familiar enough with her. Emma Hardinge Britton, and she brings us the information about the Orphic Circle. Now, as I learned, Kipling had a sister who had advanced psychic abilities, and that Kipling's father had a big meeting with Blavatsky in 1880, which I also found quite interesting, in India. Kipling kept as the logo on his books over and over again. Remember, this is before the Nazis now, so don't call him an anti-Semite. The swastika there on his writings, on all of his books. And I mean, all of his books had it pre the rise of the Nazis.
It's almost like it's like a lucky symbol, like a 4-leaf clover or something, right?
Yeah, you could say that.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's an identification that he had. Now, in the East, of course, you encounter that symbol a lot. As we've demonstrated in Sanskrit, it means good fortune. Let's take a look at Mine Own People, cover there by Kipling. Obviously, the swastika's deep, deep in his imagery. The Light That Failed, Rudyard Kipling. There it is down here, and this is particularly like the ones they will use in the Tula Society, that kind of sloping X. So we're getting this handle on this. Von Rosen over there in Sweden, touring South America, he's using this. He's painting his planes with it and giving them to the Finnish Air Force and creating the Finnish Air Force. Von Rosen, being the recipient of part of that Keeley technology, becomes an incredible aviation expert, developing these special planes. So what we're getting is that mystery school technology is moving around. Something's happening here, and the swastika, being this emblem from deep inside the mystery traditions, is about to be moved out into the public. But it's also, as we know, it will end up being subverted drastically by the Nazi Party. Here is Trix Kipling, who at a very young age would interact with ghosts and spirits. She had an incredibly psychic demeanor, much like Emma Britton. And when I was reading her story, it was remarkable because they would send her back to London. And I found that interesting because it seemed to me that she was being developed by the Orphic Circle, especially since later in life, she would be doing channeling through the London Psychical Society for the Prime Minister in the 1890s. This is her a little older, and she becomes a very interesting author and poetress herself, writing books, and she's in the shadow of Rudyard Kipling, who's become a massive success. But Trix Kipling, kind of rising in this psychic tradition and being an expert medium, along with Rudyard Kipling using this swastika symbol on all of his books, tells me they're coming right out of this mystery tradition that's in India. And by the way, the Theosophical thrust became completely Indian-oriented. It didn't start out that way. But the entire push of what Steiner called the Eastern initiators, that mystery school, they start working directly with Blavatsky. So in essence, what we have is we have Kipling's dad meeting with Blavatsky. We have them using that swastika symbol, which Theosophy used. And then we have Kipling's sister, who Trix Kipling, doing this remarkable psychic work and even starting something in Edinburgh called Psychic College. I'm still looking for details on the background on that, but we're going to get deeper into it. I have a picture of her tools. Let's see. After she died, one of her relatives on the McDonald side, by the way, apparently her mother and her mother's sister were incredible, powerful psychics also. Who knew? So they found this among her effects after she died. This is her actual kind of fortune-telling setup with a crystal scryer and all the rest. So this is someone who was deep, deep in this tradition. And then we know when she goes to London and she's part of the Psychic Society, she will be giving channeled readings for Prime Minister. And what's funny is it wasn't scandalous because there was this kind of awareness around the psychic aspects, the more kind of ethereal themes. It is remarkable. Can you imagine that now, Miss Olivia?
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
If you could imagine the period now that we're in, just thinking about when she's channeling for the Prime Minister of Britain, 1894, and it's not a big deal. It's not even a scandal. It's remarkable, isn't it?
You can't even fathom it.
I mean, if you did it now, we all know when Nancy Reagan was exposed for having
she still gets shit for it.
Exactly. No four-letter words. Okay. Let's do it. This is Edith McDonald. Aunt Edie. That is her psychic aunt, who is Rudyard Kipling's psychic aunt. Kipling, by the way, would take his family to Boston, and where there's Emma Britton is here, and that entire movement around Theosophy, so much of it was taking root here. I find that quite fascinating. Eventually he'd wind up in Vermont. So now we have Kipling kind of in this picture using this. Let's take a look again at the people in that circle around Clara Bloomfield Moore. Clara Jessup, of course, Jessup is well known to people in the UFO field. And I want to tell you that you're watching the Dark Journalist show. It's great to have everyone here, and what a fantastic, enlightening show. And I know that Olivia has a lot of energy tonight. So we're just going to get a lot out of her tonight.
I had too many Oreos. It's a sugar high.
Just wait till later. It's going to kick in. But I want to suggest you go to the Dark Journalist website at darkjournalist.com. Sign up for the newsletter. That keeps us in touch. I don't have words for the type of censorship that we're seeing across so many different platforms, and the way that the kind of Davos crowd is bragging about it. These guys, the Facebooks, the Amazons,
it's Silicon fascism.
The Google and Twitters, that whole Silicon fascist set, we're on the platform, and I have to tell you that I highly suggest that with as often as possible, with something like a direct setup like the newsletter between us, it's a much better way to go, because you don't know the types of moves that they'll make as soon as you get close to a major discovery. And I've been, using YouTube for 5 years now with Dark Journalist show. But now I'm seriously looking at them and thinking, they're just doing a crackdown, and eventually they're going to get what comes around goes around. They're going to get around to it. So I'm keeping a very close eye on them. The way that we can get around it is what you can do is sign up for the newsletter at the website. By the way, you get a confirmation email that comes within like 5 seconds. You have to click the link in the email to get signed up. That's just a way of verifying the email address. So make sure you do that. We're going to stay on top of it. And regardless of what these social media networks do, we're going to continue the work that we're doing, and we're going to put it out through darkjournalist.com regardless. So that's where you want to be. That's where you want to have yourself signed up. Of course, subscribe to the YouTube, Dark Journalist YouTube channel on Facebook and Twitter. I mean, we're there. We'll be there as long as they allow us the public platform. Okay. Clara Jessup Bloomfield Moore. Let's take a look at some of her associations. She is the benefactress for Keely and his etheric technology. That's important. But she also has a meeting with and interest in the work of Nikola Tesla. The scientist named Maxim, the inventor who created the machine gun. This is a very interesting guy. I'm sure we'll get into him at some point. Bulwer Lytton, who writes Zanoni and writes The Coming Race, about a whole advanced group that lives underground and it's going to take over the above ground. And what is it that Steiner and Blavatsky had to say about him? Well, they said he was letting out Rosicrucian truths, and that he was an initiate himself. So Bulwer Lytton's work is mandatory. I highly recommend it. It's got some of those language things when we look back to the 19th century, but if we get past it, my God, just fantastic. Clara Jessup Bloomfield Moore was presented to the court of Queen Victoria. She met Queen Victoria. I mean, this is a real incredible mover and shaker. One of the heads of Golden Dawn, William Wynne Westcott. So in essence, she kind of had that world that was developing, that kind of metaphysical mystery school connected world was right in the palm of her hand, along with all the political connections. And, I've looked into it. It's quite fascinating. It's true that her husband had this incredible paper company and was kind of powerful and wealthy, but over and over again, I was wondering, why does she have these incredible connections? That's where I was going to bring in the bloodline that Olivia had me show you earlier, and I'm glad she did, because now I don't have to go through that. But it is interesting because her family line contains John Kerry and the Dulles brothers and so many more. She became very tight with Besant and Blavatsky. Okay, so we're starting to get a handle on what it is that happened here. But she writes books about Keely's technology, and it's interesting because her books, she's written something like 19 books. Her books are so powerful. They are the only good record that we have besides some news articles about what Keely's technology was. We need to rediscover the free energy patterns that he was working with. Now, it's true that the Mystery School says that information, that particular technology, according to Blavatsky, couldn't be let out because there were, the society itself was still under the kind of corporate raider mentality. So therefore, we didn't have the ability to act on it ourselves. And so we're going to be under the thumb, basically, of these corporate people. So therefore, it was prevented not only by the corporate raiders coming after it and, trying to repress it from the public, but the mystery schools found themselves in the weird position of having to disown Keely as well, because here he was tapping into what she said was an occult secret about primordial energy, that if we got it too soon, basically, it was Besant's decision. She said, if we get our hands on this now, these people are going to bomb each other out of existence. And if you look at World War II, where we used the atom bomb, I mean, it proved to be right. I mean, they were 100% correct. But I think it's interesting because where are we now? The mystery schools told us in 100 years, Steiner said in 1916, there's going to be this window that will open up for the mystery schools to have this opportunity to bring forward these truths again, because Steiner had this impression that the mystery schools had actually failed, or at least that's how he felt with the advent of World War I. And I actually think that some of what Besant was doing in setting up Krishnamurti as the world teacher was also that, my God, we can't fail. The public has to get behind this, and was kind of a Hail Mary pass to create a world teacher and kind of force God's hand and say, channel through this boy now and save the world. And it didn't work out so well because he came forward and dissolved the order of the star they set up for him, and Theosophy kind of fumbled along ever since. But the truths in Theosophy can't be denied. Rudolf Steiner himself came forward because he was a Theosophist, remember, before he started Anthroposophy. And when they went into this super Eastern twist, he said, you're missing the Western initiators part, the Rosicrucian part. That's the crucial piece. The Eastern part set that up for us. If you just emphasize the Eastern wisdom and the Eastern masters, then you're missing half the picture. So he had split off and done Anthroposophy. But really, if you look at that whole chain of events, we have to genuinely say that in the eyes of people like Steiner, true initiators stood at the cradle of Theosophy. We have to understand what Theosophy was and how important that impulse has been and continues to be. I mean, these are not movements that go away. It's a funny thing with the mystery schools. A lot of people say, well, movements come and go, all the rest of it. But there is an explanation in the Gurdjieff work, which is that they're not meant to be institutionalized. If they're a true mystery school, they'll rise out to the public, they'll spread seeds, and they'll retreat to the background, and they'll watch to see what the public does with the seeds that they've planted. This is a very important principle for us to remember. Okay, so we've covered pretty well now the Rudyard Kipling aspect and Clara Bloomfield, Jessup Bloomfield Moore's daughters marrying into the von Rosen family. So when we look at this thing about the swastika coming forward and how these groups basically, like the Tula Society, subordinated its meaning, and how the Nazis grabbed that mystery information and made it their major symbol for world domination, it kind of spins the world upside down from what was about to happen there. So we can see that if people like Steiner were looking off into the future, they were seeing the kind of chaos that was taking place, and they were saying the mystery schools failed, but they're going to have another opportunity. They saw something in the cycle of time that showed that there was another opportunity going on. Okay, so now when we look at what von Rosen did, and we start to get this impression that we have this mystery airship wave that takes place. And when Walter Bosley gets here, we're going to get deep into this, but I just want to set it up here. This wave that happens becomes the UFO file in 1947. That's the major wave. So we're going to count backwards from there. You've got those major incidents like the Roswell case, the Aztec UFO case. And what's happening is people are having these sightings, and then there are reported crashes, kind of out of the blue, coming fast and furious in 1947. But it turns out there were earlier cases, like the 1941 case in Cape Girardeau, that Harry Truman is in charge of. So now suddenly we're dealing with this aspect. Let's take a look at a few of these, because I think what we're seeing is not so much all the time when people are looking at it, they'll say, well, it's military craft or it's off-world craft. And I understand those two conclusions, but there's a third option here, which is that the mystery schools have the technology and that they also use it. This is a very unusual thing. Winged ship in the skies cleaves the air with pinions like a huge condor. That is 1896. We'll just take a quick look at that. These things were flying around before the Wright brothers got off the ground. So what does it tell us? Somebody in those schools were flying these things. If we go into Bosley's work, he's going to tell us about this secret group called NIMSA. That is one interesting explanation, and these different aero clubs that will turn up. But by the time you get to 1950 and people are seeing these, I think we are still looking at something which started and got a jump start through the work of people like John Keeley. And that some of these discs that we're seeing come directly out of the mystery school tradition, that we're not seeing just military crafts or off-world crafts, that these groups actually possess some aspect of this technology and have developed it. Now, a lot of people would say, what about, there's that whole thing about the Nazi UFO craft. I think the Nazi UFO craft came out of this X technology that Keeley had developed. And I don't think that either of these groups, either the Theosophical end of the spectrum who hid the technology, or the Rosens who got it through the family connection of Clara Bloomfield Moore, who was Keeley's major benefactress, I don't think they had the whole thing. I think they seem to have aspects of it, because every once in a while you hear of these incredible ships doing these incredible things, and they're associated with the apotheum effects. They cause time distortion, they disappear, they blink out, they create missing time. So they're operating with different physics. These other things are almost wobbly. It's almost like there's some aspect of the technology that these people have developed and got right. It reminds me very much of our own attempts in the beginning at reverse engineering that technology. By the way, I think we've gotten really good in America at redeveloping the technology. And I think that we're kind of moving into this incredible era with it, because I think that now they're getting to a point where they know they can't hide it. So they're coming up with kind of fake reasons to bring it out. And there are people trying to cash in on that, like the TTSA. And by the way, when Walter gets on, we're going to have some amusing things about the TTSA. Before he gets on, I want to try to read you a couple of quotes relating to Rudolf Steiner's view on Keeley, because I think it's important for us to take Keeley very, very seriously. So these are direct quotes from some of his lectures that I collected here. Steiner had a thought when it came to electricity, actually. He thought that the way that we used it, it was still too associated with our willpower. And he felt that it could become retrogressive as a means of power, and that there was a third force that was going to come into the picture, and that we had to develop a kind of a moral fiber to get to that point of using it ethically, because it isn't technology that can be used coming from a kind of a dark place. Okay, he actually would refer to many of the electrical things that we were discovering as fallen light, which I found interesting, because he's saying going into this post-Atlantean period, after we developed this kind of huge disaster and the major things that happened with the Two-Eye Stone that the Atlanteans had used and destroyed their continent with, and had caused all these things like pole shifts, that there was something in the electricity and the technology that they were using. And when we got into this period, he called it fallen light, which I found was quite interesting. But here's what he had to say about Keeley. Vibratory energy. New ideals arise just in the most excellent spirits. Indeed, these spirits who point to a distant future are not the so-called practical spirits, but world history advances differently from the practical people. I've pointed to a pillar of idealism of Tolstoy before, but today I'd like to point to a Western spirit, to John Ernst Worrell Keeley. Of course, Keeley was around from 1827 to 1898. He invented a motor based on vibratory energy. He was a great mechanic who furthers us, although his mechanical idea is not yet a practical one. Some questions are connected with it, which may appear fantastic to the materialist. But at the same time, we want to get to know an idealism that is of another type than of the everyday life. It is the same that lived in the mysteries once. So what he's saying is, whatever it was that Keeley is touching on with his etheric technology is the same thing that exists inside the mysteries, and read the mysteries as the mystery schools. So, when we had Susan Manowich on a couple of weeks ago, she was discussing moral technology. And this was quite fascinating because moral technology is something that she is developing her work around right now inside the Steiner work. There's something where he called it moral machines. And he says, it is perhaps known to you that Keeley invented a motor which would only go if he himself were present. He was not deceiving people about this, for he had in him that driving force originating in the soul, which can set machines in motion, a driving force which can only be moral. That is the idea of the future, a most important force with which culture must be inoculated if it is not to fall back on itself. The mechanical and the moral must interpenetrate each other, because the mechanical is nothing without the moral. Can you imagine telling that to our tech leaders right now who are trying to repress people for sharing views on the social media platforms? This is a crucial observation, I think, on the part of Steiner. Before we go any further, I'm going to check in with Miss Olivia.
Mm-hmm.
How's it going over there?
Going great. Do you want to take a question?
Yes.
Or are you going to try to squeeze a little bit more in before Walter comes on?
I'm going to try to squeeze in here. What I'm looking for is Mabel Collins.
Oh, right.
So
you haven't even mentioned her yet.
Just you wait. But how are your questions going over there?
I have so many. I already have too many
Whoa.
for the whole night.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's good. It's great to have everyone here. It's kind of like, it's exactly what we need is you guys, even if we don't get to all the questions this time around, come the next round, we definitely will include them. By the way, a very, very early version of that swastika is basically the X. I mean, straight up, how much more like an X can you get? I mean, the swastika has that as the root. So keep that in mind when we're talking about that and when we're relating the things about Rosen and Kipling, that this is, it's the X technology, it's the X Steganography that they are tapping into with this. Okay, go ahead.
You want a question?
Sure.
Okay. All right. There are two that are kind of related. Cutting Through the Fog says, how did the Theosophists regard the occult/psychic work of the Nazis? And JJK is asking, what became of the schools of mysteries when the Nazis came to power?
Well, Theosophy and Anthroposophy were completely opposed to the Nazis. And the Nazis themselves, it's interesting because you hear these specials sometimes. They're like, oh, the Nazis adopted the swastika from Blavatsky. What an evil person she must be. It's really quite ridiculous because, they were kind of cashing in. There was a lot of things going on where in Germany, because of the Treaty of Versailles and all the rest of it, the culture itself had become desperate and it was open to be manipulated from a number of different angles. There were a lot of different occult movements active at the period. And so they took some of the information that was rising up there that the mystery schools had let out, and they started to identify themselves with it, but that's just like somebody doing something with the American flag and wrapping themselves in it and then not acting very American. I mean, that's It's just they're just putting on the uniform, putting on the symbolism. There's no question that the Nazi Party worked for deep occult knowledge. They were trying to kind of achieve this incredible occult knowledge, but they their purposes for doing that, where they were aiming for, was kind of world domination, where they were the superior ones and all the rest of it. You're not going to find that in Theosophy. I mean, it doesn't exist. That, you know, obviously Theosophy is moving towards the fifth root race, and, you know, so they're going for a totally different type of society. If you look at Steiner's threefold society, that's how to build a harmonious structure. So it's quite the opposite. But it is remarkable the way that they sometimes in the history books, to kind of get you away from the Theosophists, to get you away from the Anthroposophists, they'll throw it up and they'll be like, oh, they're associated with Nazis. They were around, you know, 50 to 60 years before the Theosophists, before the Nazis even showed up. Remarkable.
Did you find Mabel Collins?
I've got a few things on Mabel Collins, and Mabel Collins wrote The Light on the Path, which Blavatsky, that's one of the most famous theosophical books. It's short, it's very short, but it's quite remarkable. And I was rereading it again today. But Blavatsky said that it was Master Hilarion who dictated the book to Mabel Collins, who had incredible mediumistic tendencies, like Trix Kipling, like Emma Britton. It seems the masters like that big open spirit. So, but that is Blavatsky giving a kind of stamp of approval on that book, saying Master Hilarion. Now, Master Hilarion will become the major master in charge of Halcyon, the intentional community that is set up under Annie Besant, who will have the Varian brothers. You know, that whole thing that happens with the Varian brothers creating the Kleistron and all that and becoming incredible scientists. Well, Master Hilarion is in charge of that whole community. By the way, another member of Halcyon was Vice President Henry Wallace, who was Roosevelt's vice president. And guess what? He was going to be President X, because he was vice president way before Truman, and he was to become vice president under FDR for the second term as vice president, Roosevelt's fourth term. And during the convention, basically the Masons made a run for it, made a big push. And when he was going to be elected, they yelled fire. And these groups inside, I mean, I attribute it to the Masons because Truman was a Mason and they needed to get him in. But these forces that were pro-Truman yelled fire. And when they came back the next day, the votes were rigged against Wallace, and they threw Wallace out as VP. Quite an interesting process. But Mabel Collins writing Light on the Path, this is a significant book, and I think it's a very important staging ground for what will happen with Theosophy. And she will house Blavatsky in London. She will be at the center of this whole movement, and she will kind of give a jolt there in the 1880s to Theosophy and get it back on track. Mabel Collins, this is a picture of her later. This is someone who didn't seem to age, which is quite remarkable. And isn't that interesting, Olivia, when you look at that?
I know, she's just gorgeous.
Fascinating woman. Mabel Collins will go into her later life. She will, before Blavatsky dies, Blavatsky has kind of a blowout with her. But Blavatsky kind of had a blowout with everyone, as it turned out. She had an incredibly high temper, and she would fight with everyone from Ledbetter to Colonel Olcott. And, you know, so she doesn't seem like, you know, we think of these people as in touch with masters. They're going to be perfect and Zen all the time. It's not true. I mean, she was who she was. And actually, it's kind of funny because it's interesting when you look at Olcott goes to the masters and he says, why, you know, does Blavatsky have this hot temper? Can't we do anything about it? And the response that he gets, I think, is very interesting, because they say to him, well, her temperament is part of what keeps her alive. So you might find it kind of unwieldy or whatever, but somehow that's the driving force in her actual physical stamina. And we know that Blavatsky had a number of health issues as she got older, and she only lived really till 60 years old. which back then actually was quite good. But she had things, like bullet scars, and she'd really been through the mill. I mean, this is somebody who lived her life courageously, and everyone from Manly P. Hall to Steiner and Alcott give her that incredible acknowledgement as just somebody who really stood in her truth. Doesn't mean she was an easy person to be around.
Are you going to bring up the
Jack the Ripper?
No. Well, you could. No, you told me about Blavatsky surviving that shipwreck.
Oh, she did. Yeah, she was heading. By the way, pop quiz: how did Blavatsky keep herself alive while she was on this incredible spiritual quest, Olivia?
By being a concert pianist.
Absolutely right. Now, this is an interesting thing because we know Emma Britton, when she got out of the Orphic Circle, they set her up as what? A concert pianist. And she could actually channel these incredible classical music pieces as a teenager and got a lot of unusual attention for doing this. But this is kind of at the very heart of things if we think about it. Olivia, I'm going to ask you to check that Facebook link because I have a feeling that Walter's running late and I want to know that. So do you know how to get in there?
I don't. Everybody, okay. I don't have a Facebook account.
All you have to do is pop open the Dark Journalist site and click on the Facebook link on the top. And that'll pump up. In the meantime, I'll remind everyone else to go to Dark Journalist also. Go to darkjournalist.com. We have a page there, which is the entire X series. So it's darkjournalist.com/xmaster.php. That's just the master page that has all the episodes on it. There's over 25 episodes there. Obviously, there's so much information, power pack there that's available freely to the public, and I highly recommend that you check it out. Also sign up for the newsletter while you're at the site. Get behind the site, subscribe to the site. You're going to want to be a member by the time the fall really kicks in, because we have some wonderful surprises there for you. So if you're at the page now, Miss Olivia, there's a Facebook link on the top right.
Yes, I'm in Facebook and I'm supposed to log in.
Oh, no, here's what you do. Actually, just hand me the iPhone over there and I'll check it myself. Okay. Gracias. Gracias, senorita.
Here you go.
Let's do it. We'll take this important pause to see if Walter Bosley is on the base pads. Okay, well, there's no message from Walter there. So let's see what is keeping him tardy. There's Walter. Sorry, I'm having to install the program. Okay, so I'm going to just respond to Walter. Just log in through Chrome. Okay. There he is, and we're waiting for him. In the meantime,
we can bring up Jack the Ripper for a split second.
Here, do me a favor, and when Walter responds, just let him know that we're on track. There's a weird Jack the Ripper thing that creeps in here, but I won't spend too much time on that. But Mabel Collins associates with this guy, and while she's living there with Blavatsky, and Blavatsky is like, you have to really watch out for the people you associate with. And then this guy later will become a suspect in the Jack the Ripper case. And sometimes people will kind of loop in about Mabel Collins that she dated Jack the Ripper, which is pretty...
Or that she bedded Jack the Ripper.
Exactly. But as it turns out, they dropped the case against him because he wasn't there or whatever. But obviously a very, very tricky situation with Jack the Ripper there in the 1880s. Now, Mabel Collins writing The Light on the Path and being inspired by Master Hilarion and being there and, really taking a beating from Blavatsky in some ways. But one of the things that she points out is that when all this stuff goes on after the whole Keeley blowout or whatever, that it is Besant who basically says, sometimes you need to preserve the tree by breaking off a twig. And this is this whole kind of thing about Theosophy and the mystery schools protecting the X information from coming out and getting into unscrupulous hands. Now, when we look at what we're looking at with the national security state, they're on the other side of it. They're preventing good information from coming out because they still want to know how to take advantage of it. They don't want to, for example, with the Tesla information, let that out to the public, because then it destroys the oil paradigm. And that's, you know, something that their entire world view is based upon. Now they need to figure out how to let out this free energy aspect and still control the world. It's not an easy equation. But you can see that's a certain kind of oppression. It's almost like the oppression of these leaders who want to keep the population under their control, and they're worried about the kind of freedoms that would happen if energy didn't become a factor anymore. What the mystery schools are trying to do, and what we've seen, I think, in their major efforts, is when we've seen them come forward and, you know, say, well, we've carried this secret down about how these previous civilizations destroyed themselves by using this X tech and creating and being involved with this apotheum effect, then what's going on is they're keeping that out of the hands of the public, but they move into the public and they let it out through culture and through these different advances. Now, we've seen the Rosicrucians come forward there. Even in the 12th century, you know, the Templars are getting executed by the Pope. I mean, it's not an easy thing to come out with these new truths. Let's look at Annie Besant, one of her previous lives as Giordano Bruno, for example. So in that space, in that whole kind of world, it's a very dangerous thing to come out and buck the trend and buck the system. So the mystery schools have maintained that low profile while moving the information out into the public. In the case of Theosophy, this was a move to save us from the scientific materialism that was being flooded out and really going to dominate us through what Steiner referred to as the harmonic forces. Their whole plan, basically, in this period of time is to lock us into what? This eighth sphere idea is something that comes out of the Steiner work and through the work of A.P. Sinnott, who's a theosophist. And the eighth sphere is this kind of fantasy realm where there is no evolution. There's no evolutionary track for humanity, but it feels like you're on an evolutionary track. That's what the harmonic forces are good at. So this is a very interesting, you know, the cosmology and the kind of philosophy of these groups and what they're trying to get out to us, I think is quite important. They've left it with us. It's a legacy, and it's something that here, 100 years later, we have the ability to sift through it and have it apply, because they came forward and gave us the gift from the mystery schools. But the question is, what are we going to do with it? You know, and when you look around in the general field, there's a little bit of a malaise on the spiritual side. And, you know, you hear groups, the tired thing about UFO disclosure. I mean, that's not where it's at. We have a legacy and we have a gift to move forward out into the world. And we have the ability to do it with that connection using the tools that they left us in the work of anthroposophy and theosophy. And I want to really stress, as I did, you know, we put up the thumbnail, it had Besant and Blavatsky. These are two incredibly key people in history. We have to understand the impact that they had. And, you know, when we kind of bring it down to this moment of the Keeley technology, we can see it incredibly active right there, because Theosophy supported Keeley, but they also, when the time came, they preserved the information and they made sure that it stayed out of the hands of this kind of corporate hierarchy. These are very important things. These are important moves, as are the moves to promote Gandhi and kind of create independence, and the various things that they've done in different countries. So it's a powerful mystery school happening, and we're still experiencing the ripples of it. Now, the question is, what are we going to do with the incredible work and the foundation that they've left us? And I think that's really where we move into questions, Ms. Olivia.
Well, I'm going to ask you right away, what would the number one thing you would recommend to the whole group be as far as application?
Well, it's interesting. I'm a journalist. I'm a dark journalist. And as a journalist, I can give you the facts and give you the information. So it's not so much a spiritual teaching, but I can tell you that the mystery schools have left this information for us. And if we go through that information together, then we can arrive at a place where we understand the political situation, we understand the kind of cultural situation that we're in. But what's very important is we can understand all of these spiritual traditions that have come out and given us a choice to see, what humanity is really all about. And that also takes into account the metaphysical aspects and our spiritual side. You can't, if you go through something along the lines of a spiritual teaching, you can't go through your regular life, in my opinion, completely denying that aspect of yourself. If you do, then it seems to me you're missing out on who you are, essentially. And I think this is what the scientific materialism is about, because most of the society, if you really look at it, is locked into the scientific materialism. And that's where we're headed. That's where the technology is grooming us toward. But I do want to say that, with people back there who left this, like Mabel Collins and like Besant, like Blavatsky, Clara Bloomfield Moore. I mean, these are incredible people that moved the culture, moved the question. And so here we are understanding the X Steganography. We've got a piece of it. We're kind of have a handle on it. And so the question is, what's the next move?
Well, isn't it, we've talked about this a lot, about wasting energy, that it takes a lot of energy to transform.
There's no question.
And there are these simple tools that each one of us could do every single day, like not engaging in negativity, trying to disengage from worry, from negative thinking. And if you can't disengage from negative thinking, at least not negative talking. Right?
Well, in all of these traditions, in the Gurdjieff movement, actually, it's quite fascinating. And anyone can apply the truths that are in the Gurdjieff movement, which is that when you spend time being critical and being negative, that it's actually wasting energy that's required for evolution. I've always found that interesting because, we waste energy in a variety of ways. But one of the worst ways I've seen people waste energy in the alternative space is what I call 2 minutes hate, where that's taken directly from George Orwell in 1984, where they would put up some political figure and everybody would hate on it for 2 minutes and then go back to what they were doing.
I'm going to go get my headphones.
There he is.
All right.
Mr. Bosley.
I'm going to go get my headphones with the mic. I'll be right back.
The mic sounds good. That is Walter Bosley. We're very excited. I should say that Walter has, to his credit, some incredible books, including the Empire of the Wheels series. And it's part 2 of that series, Friends from Sonora, that I think is really the kind of shining star in that series, but they're all incredibly good. But that's the one that focuses so much on what we have tonight. But he also has another book out called Shimmering Light, which is about some of those family backgrounds. So we're going to get into all of that with him tonight. It's great to have him here. You're watching Dark Journalist, and I'm here with Olivia trying to solve the world's problems.
Yes,
and she's getting good at it too.
So let's have you field one question before Walter comes back. So David Tormita wants to know, do you think Keeley was a mystery school student, or did they seek him out?
I think Clara Bloomfield Moore sought him out after seeing what he was capable of. And
okay.
Hey, Walter.
Hey. Sorry about that.
How's it going?
Good. I had to do some tech stuff.
You're a busy man.
Sorta, but I forget that I have to make sure that I'm loaded up first with the app.
Oh yeah, right.
So I apologize for being so late, but yeah. But
no, we've got you here. That's the important thing. That's what's important. It's very interesting. I was just talking about Clara Jessup Bloomfield Moore, who I know. And it's interesting some of the things that she was tied into there with Keeley and Tesla. But what are some of your impressions of someone like that and what she was doing back there?
What I know of her is, limited to what research I had to do for the stuff I wrote about Keeley, I think, in a couple of my books. And of course, my copy of the Keeley in his Discoveries book, which I think everyone into this has a copy of this, I think, right?
Yes, fascinating.
And it's a great book. And through reading this and pulling it off the shelf earlier today again, it's first of all, it's kind of a clunky book to try to get through with the writing style of the period. But I think that she's somebody who, it's a good thing that, for him and guys like him, like Tesla and stuff, that there was somebody like her around, because, being a great patron and all that. But I think she was coming from, the spiritualist theosophist angle. So she gets, for my tastes, she gets a little, what we call new agey. But if you look at what she's writing and what she's saying, I think that she saw, how amazing the potential was for what Keeley was trying to do. Whether she, like I'm stumbling right now, whether she put it in the right words or not to convey that,
oh, sure,
it is another thing. But I think that she was, based on what I know, like I said, I think she was, of course, a well-meaning person. I don't see her as somebody who was in those sinister circles, and those, as we know, those circles existed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I don't see her as one of those. I think she was an honest patron.
Yes, yeah, no question about it. Her daughters marrying off into these kind of regal Swedish families, and then what I found particularly interesting, and in the first hour we covered a lot about Erich von Rosen and how he adopted the early version of the swastika, and how she had access to all of her information about Keeley. And she's one of the few people who actually wrote books about him in the period. She knew so much about his technology and his work. What I find interesting when we get to Keeley is how his work just disappears there. You're in 1898, he dies. There's a little thing about, oh, he was a fraud, and then he's gone. And there's no blueprints, there's nothing.
I have suggested and proposed that where Tesla, in my opinion, this is my opinion based on my research and personal analysis, where Tesla, I think, hooked up with what we would call the American side of the airship things, more specifically that group that I have labeled the 1903. I don't know if that's what they call themselves. It's that other breakaway that I've talked about.
Yes.
I think Keeley was absorbed into the German side of things, rather his technology. And I think this because of his popularity with the Theosophists. Now, we know that there were some prominent early Nazis that had very deep Theosophy connections. There was Carl Maria Willigut, who was, there's a, where is it? I got it right here. I mean, I don't know if you can see this, but there's the photo of Carl Maria Willigut in his Nazi uniform.
Right.
And he was very much involved through Lance von Liebenfels with the OTO and, other very prominent German Theosophists. Yeah. And of course, the German Theosophists and the American Theosophists were, had their connections. Yeah. And, he wasn't the only one. You had Kellner and others. And I think that that's why Keeley greatly disappeared, or rather his technology, is because it got absorbed into what the Germans were doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting, that 1903 thing. I want to touch on that because you attribute a lot to those guys.
Yeah, if I'm right, I attribute the 1890s airship mystery to them for certain.
I mean, would you say that the Keeley technology, if it got absorbed by that German part, what role do you think it plays in those types of sightings, like the mystery airship sightings?
I do think that there were Keeleyan ideas whenever the witnesses would describe spinning and rotation. Okay. But remember, as I and others, I've demonstrated in my books through Delshau's work. Charles Delshau, our original source of NIMSA and the Sonora Aero Club. Delshau himself shows that the Sonora Aero Club was fooling around with what we would call, the Bell technology. Okay, the famous World War II era Bell, literally bell-shaped spinning rotating device. So we know that at that time the NIMSA associated guys had their hands on whatever the source of the Bell was, which I'm in the camp that says the source was the ancient Vimana Hindu knowledge.
Yeah.
Keeley, as we know, was toying around with similar things, the idea of spinning and rotation. So when you look at the 1890s airship mystery, there are definitely Keelian ideas. So the extent of he himself being involved in the development of that, of course, it's even further speculation.
Wow, it's interesting, actually. You touched on a lot there, because when I think of the Bell, of course, we only know about the Bell since this little testimony, since 1990, since German reunification, right? We didn't even hear about it or know about it. But it's interesting, once we have that tool, we can backtrack. It's almost like, you're using this kind of Rosetta Stone and saying, oh, this thing existed. I can backtrack it through these other things that happened.
Right.
But the Bell aspect in Delshau's work, and we should say that Delshau, let's give a little background on Delshau, because he really is the foundation of so much of the work that you've done around that Sonora Aero Club.
Yeah, this is what makes this whole Bell connection really interesting too, because Delshau's a guy whose diaries and multiple books of hundreds of drawings of these flying contraptions he calls arrows. That's spelled A-E-R-O. He is the one who told us about the Sonora Aero Club of the 1850s, that decade before the Civil War, during which these guys in Sonora, California, up by Yosemite, were playing around with flying machines and essentially some form of anti-gravity in the 1850s. Okay, that sounds crazy.
Wow.
But here's the thing. Charles Delshau started doing his books in the 1890s and died in 1923. When you have a piece of artwork that was done sometime between 1890 whatever and 1923 that depicts the Bell in physical description and describes it in verbal description right there in his books, prior to the rise of the Nazis, and what we're told was the beginning of the Nazis experimenting with the Bell. Here's the thing, just like you said, we didn't hear about the Bell until the 1990s. Now, Pete Navarro had discovered the books in 1971, and he was doing some research, but still, the fact that we have the Bell in the Delshau work, and in there since prior to his death in 1923, 70 years or so before we learn about the Bell through Igor Witkowski's work.
Yeah.
That right there is kind of a validator, right? Or validation, kind of a verifier of what Witkowski was, presenting, and what the 1990s source on the Bell was claiming. Because there it is, and connected with a German organization, according to Delshau, this Prussian NIMSA.
Yes. Now, NIMSA, it's NYMZA. And
yes, all capital letters.
You've brought that, you've gone really deep into who they are and who they could have been. What's the kind of like nutshell version of who they are?
What they were then, of course, and because what they are now is a much bigger thing. But what they were then was essentially a group of Prussian industrialists and philosopher scientists, okay, guys into alchemy and things like that, who were very much for the unified Germany. Now, remember, during the days of NIMSA that Delshau talks about, it's prior to the unification of the German states into the nation we know as Germany. These were the guys who were really behind that. They would have been akin to, if you were to take, say, a political party and give them the financial and technological means, okay, of being able, say, to start their own country, so to, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Mhm.
This is what NIMSA was within Delschau's description. But they were more than that. They saw the unification of Germany as just the first step of bringing to material fruition their ideals and goals. They wanted to dominate the world in kind of a military, industrial, political complex, as it were. That's really another way you could look at them, as an independent military industrial complex. And out of this, you can see comes the idea of the global government.
Mhm.
The idea of bringing the whole world under the aegis of one organization, because through the unification of Germany, they were going to apply old Prussian ideas of using industry to invade other territories and take over. Okay, they would unify Germany, and then they would expand by really going out there and kind of doing these industrial colonies everywhere else in the world. They set their sights on South America specifically, but everywhere in the world. And what would happen is a little German community, a little German mindset would grow in that country that would begin to rely on this industry that
Right.
was imported. Okay, Halmer Schacht is credited with wanting to do the same thing during the early Nazi era. Okay,
Mhm.
he got the idea from 400 years of the way Prussians do business,
Mhm.
and this is really what they were, was a military industrial political party that gained actual real governmental power through really pushing and making happen the unification of Germany. And of course, the rest is history, because these are the guys who were behind the push that really made Germany do all the things they did for their parts in the world wars.
Fascinating. Well, it's interesting too, because the Nazis had those deep occult ties, and NIMSA seems to come out of that branch. NIMSA itself, though, NYMZA, it's an acronym,
Mhm.
possibly. uh,
Yeah.
yes. So you have a particular ability to kind of go deeper than just the acronym, and you kind of figure out what the words mean in relation to it. Can you give us a little bit of that?
Yes, and I always try to have it marked. I actually spell it out in this book.
Yes.
I'm going to try to do it off memory because I've talked about it a lot. I'll explain real quickly the logic of how I came to this. NIMSA was a word that had been talked about when talking about the airship mystery, and specifically Delschau. Delschau always capitalized it.
Hmm.
So, in my mind, looking at it, and not just me, other scholars that I work with, saw this as, okay, let's look at it as an acronym. Now, over the years, people have tried to decipher what NIMSA means, and they would come up with New York, this, that, or the other, like the New York Motor Zephyr Association, things like that. But it never seemed to really explain it all. Well, you go back to Delschau, who is our earliest source
Mhm.
of this word as such and connected to all this. And he says plainly that it was a German organization headquartered in Berlin, in Germany.
Okay.
So it was my view that, well, okay, if looks like an acronym and it's a German organization. So what I did was I literally started, looking at, did a little linguistic work, started looking at the German language, started looking, at the letters NYMZA, and okay, what words in German language, within, having to do with aeronautics or anything like that, would fit. It took me a while, but I came up with the national I'm sorry, let me get this right, the nationalist um, uh, Exploration, the Nationalist Exploratory Airship Office
Right.
is the English translation
Yeah.
of the German words that spell out NYMZA, the Nationalistische Jagdflugzeug Maschinen
Right.
Zum, I forget the word. It's the ZA is actually a capital Z small a in my one translation, but it basically spells out NIMZA, and it's the the nationalist. Now the distinction. Notice I didn't say national. It's nationalist because at the time there was no German nation, so there were no national organizations. This was a nationalist. There's where the political party aspect of this comes into.
I see.
Okay, because these were nationalists. They were pro-nationalism of the unification of the German states, the Prussian states, into one Germany. So, and it's an important distinction because it makes it a private organization, which is what it was.
Right. So it's a non-governmental entity. It's a kind of industrial-based group.
Yeah, philosophical industrial.
Philosophical.
Think about the philosopher scientists, as we call them, who started the Royal Society in England. Okay, these were Freemasons. These were guys who, as well as working in astronomy and physics and mathematics, they also dabbled in alchemy and philosophy and occult ideas and such. Now, we know by 1830, the nerdy little bean counter accountant type scientists outnumbered the philosopher scientists and changed the Royal Society, and therefore changed the profession of science up till today. That's why we have the Michael Shermers of the world, because he was of the ilk. He was of the ilk that hated these guys in 1830. They hated these philosopher scientists. Okay, they hated the Isaac Newtons and and that's what these guys who would have started and been involved in NIMZA were. In my book, I go through and I identify Karl Waniak and several of them, Kellner, basically the industrialists of the day of the 19th century, the early 19th century up to the early 20th century, who these guys happened to also be not just the leaders in the steel industry and chemistry and all that, but they were all philosopher scientists. They were also into the occult. They were into alchemy. They were into the Hermetic sciences as well. These are the kind of guys who would have known about, for example, the ancient Vimana technology and would have tried to apply it in a practical sense via NIMZA, via these airship groups.
Wow, it's fascinating. So they weren't hindered by this kind of scientific materialism. They really could go into that bigger, more open space. And we know a lot of very interesting science was coming out about that. If you think about it, I mean, Keeley himself is in that mold because he's calling his stuff etheric energy and,
Right. Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Guys like Keeley, Tesla, too, he understood that there was more to reality, our plane of reality, the spectrum of reality, than just what the materialists see. And this is why the materialists always seem to stop at a certain point or never, are never able to accomplish certain things, is because they want to reject what guys like Keeley and the philosopher scientists up into the 19th century knew and understood.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting too, if you look at NIMZA from all the work and the research that you've done about them, do you think that A, they were a mystery school, and B, if they weren't, what mystery school were they associated with?
NIMZA itself, I think, was specifically this Prussian organization of guys who were definitely involved with mystery schools, who brought that knowledge together to apply in that practical, material manner. So NIMZA itself, not a mystery school, but definitely founded and run and led by mystery school students, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe a blend too.
Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
You take all the different ideas and you do a practical application, right?
Right.
And that's what these guys would have been after because, look at it this way. We know what Adolf Hitler's vision was for Nazi Germany. Okay. He got that from somewhere. And we know that in his younger years, he was involved and influenced by these early 20th century German occultists. Well, these were theosophists. And, well, we just said a few minutes ago that these guys were, connected with the American theosophists and the British theosophists and
Right.
stuff. So what we're talking about here, the era of Keeley and Bloomfield Moore and Helena Blavatsky and all that, I mean, this is where this came from, and this was they in turn were influenced by the earlier guys who were also involved with NIMSA. So you see how that thread connects these two eras, and it again, it all comes from the kinds of things they learned in the mystery schools, the various masonries, so to speak, the occult, hermetic science.
Right. Right. Have you ever found anything relating to the Tula Society involved with NIMSA?
Well, the
That's
let me
NIMSA
turn that
talk.
off. Well, that ringer's off. Sorry about that. I apologize. The Tula Society, in my research, I conclude in my analyses, I conclude that those were guys who were definitely influenced by the earlier 19th century, again, spiritualists, theosophists, occultists.
Right.
Okay. So again, we've had for years this view that the spooky stuff that Nazi Germany was doing had its origins with the Tula Society and those guys, in the 1920s and 30s, almost as if they got these ideas out of a vacuum. Some people do see it that way.
Yeah.
Well, when I started looking at this NIMSA thing and the Sonora Aero Club and the airship mystery, it became apparent to me that no, those guys, they are the product of an earlier group, of a tradition that has been around for a while.
Yeah.
So to me, I look at the Tula Society, I look at who's in it, look who their mentors and their influences were, and you find where they were the people who were involved with Theosophy and spiritualism, and
Right.
it keeps coming back to
Yes.
these 19th century
Yeah.
spiritualist theosophists.
Absolutely. They're there. It's like it's almost like this public mystery school comes forward and everybody relates back to it. It's interesting though, when I think of NIMSA, just to give people an understanding if they weren't familiar with it, how advanced do you think their airship technology was compared to where the rest of the world was at? Because of course the rest of the world didn't have these flying machines until the Wright brothers, so we had balloons and things like that, but so how far advanced were they? 50 years, 60 years, 100 years?
No more than 50, and maybe only about 20. Here's the thing. We know that in the 1850s there were hot air balloons.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the way Delschow describes these arrows, which were kind of would have been a wonder, like, oh wow, what are these guys doing? Because they're dealing with chemical induced anti-gravity. Okay, lift is what they were really accomplishing. They had a bit of propulsion, but the big deal about the Sonora Aero Club is the idea that they had conquered lift somehow in some chemically induced and spin rotation anti-gravity way.
Right.
Now, still, these arrows of the 1850s that Delschow describes were still contraptions. Okay, they were still what we call proof of concept. They were basically just these wooden. They started out kind of as like wooden buckets, or you would take like a wooden rowboat or something. You would you could put this their technology in it, and they even had these I guess we would call them tanks now, but they had these objects, that would be filled with. This is where a lot of people confuse the arrows as being hot air balloon technology. They were not. It was filled with a gas, but it wasn't even like the gas in the Zeppelins and the blimps that came later. It was the anti-gravity gas, okay, called NB gas. But the arrows themselves were still kind of primitive proof of concept contraptions in the 1850s, the mid 19th century. Now, in my opinion, in my analysis, when you look at the great airship mystery of the 1890s, they're describing larger, more sophisticated vessels, but still they're describing things that have, whirring propellers, and, you hear this kind of electrical sound, and it's still kind of, to us, quaint type of technology, even though it's, yeah. So when you're talking about how advanced were they, well, compared to other people who the only flight they had was hot air balloons, okay, that seems like wow. But from our perspective, here's the hot air balloon, here's the airship, right? And, and we're like way out here. But so from our perspective, they were, again, somewhere between 25 to 50 years ahead of what was hot air balloon technology then. Now, where it jumped forward was in the 20th century, of course.
Right.
And a lot of people want to attribute that. They keep insisting on this as if they know it's a fact, and it's not a fact. It is still a hypothesis. Okay, the idea that the Germans captured some downed ET saucer. Okay, this is still hypothesis, folks, and not a bad one. But when you look at what we're talking about here today, you quickly see the writing on the wall that, whatever the Germans were fooling with the Bell technology and applying it to any kind of aircraft in the World War II era, they got that from these NIMSA guys and whoever was fooling around with these airships in the 19th century, not a downed alien aircraft or flying saucer. Also, talking about another thing that's a myth, that or is a hypothesis that people talk about like it's true, is the idea of the Nazi saucer, the Hanabu.
Right.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I aggravate people all the time who have embraced that and believe that like it's a known fact, when actually the whole Hanabu thing, grew out of post-World War II ideas and theories, and there's no real evidence that the Nazis ever actually built these Hanabu saucers. That there's a lot more evidence that they did the Bell.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because the Bell takes on to that advanced physics idea, and the fact that they had it, and that people literally, scientists died in its presence.
Yeah,
obviously they didn't have good control over what was going on there.
Right. They it was very much still the version they attempted to do was very much a prototype. Okay, remember what the Nazi Germany scientists brought to this Bell, that it doesn't appear that the NIMSA or the Sonora Aero Club fooled around with in the 19th century. What Nazi Germany brought to it was an immense amount of electrical power plugged in to their version of the Bell. Right. They notched it up. They juiced it up in a way.
Walter, are you
never
there?
Attempted. Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, I lost you for a second. They notched it up.
Yeah, they notched it up with tons of electricity. Okay, this is something that their NIMSA predecessors had never tried. This is something definitely that the Sonora Aero Club had never done, and because they couldn't plug electricity into this thing that is an advanced version of the Bell, the ancient Bell, so to speak. That was the thing that the Nazi scientists did that no one had done before with the Bell. And that in turn is what made it really dangerous. You mentioned before that it would kill scientists. I mean, it would turn plants and other biological matter into this black goo. The story is that they would have the Bell in this pit, or the structure that was walled with ceramic bricks and then lined with some type of, I think, lead sheets or whatever. because it was so dangerous. It just generated this particular electromagnetic, whatever radiation that, would just, it certainly as bad as any nuclear bomb could do. The radiation fallout from nuclear bomb.
It's fascinating because it touches on that idea of torsion physics. And it's interesting, too, because we have the famous case of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, and this object flying in there and basically being taken out. But it's that kind of acorn way is how it's remembered. It resembles the bell a lot, and it has those weird
Yes, it
does. I mean, this idea of 20 years passing from when they were working on it, and Kamler and all his scientists and all those people who escaped. What do you think the odds are that thing is the bell flying around?
Oh, well, in my book Origin, I don't know if you can see this, but okay. See, I take 3 pictures. In the upper picture, that is Charles Delshell's drawing prior to 1923 of essentially the bell technology being used in the 1850s.
No question.
In the middle, you have an artist's conception that, yes, I got from a website of the Nazi bell.
Right.
And then you have Kecksburg in the lower picture.
Wow.
So I'm in that school of thought. I'm convinced that Kecksburg was us trying our own bell. That the captured Nazis, I have a whole theory about paperclip, that our paperclip Nazis and us attempted to develop. And I think that's what Kecksburg definitely is. It's not an acorn, it's a bell.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is the symbols that the witnesses saw around the base. Now, those could be some type of, I guess, scientific nomenclature, or some technical things that people mistook for letters or an alien language. Who knows? Who knows what they actually saw? The fact that there were markings, that makes one think of the philosopher scientists of the century before. Is there some element of occult magic involved with this thing working, or what they were fooling around with? Because were those Solomonic magic symbols, right? That these ancient magicians allegedly would use to summon energies.
Right.
So, but that's in the imaginative speculation column.
It's like creating a grimoire.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you appreciate the Hellboy movies more when you see how they depict the German scientists using the magic and technology. It's so delicious, this stuff. But
well, let's bring that around, though, because there's some actual kind of documented proof on this, which is Jack Parsons' story. And his association probably, I mean, that actually, especially in comparison with this idea of rocketry, it's so funny because when we think of that year, 1947, and everyone wonders, why was there's major kind of UFO file explosion in 1947? We've got all the sightings, everybody's on it. But there were some unusual occult things happening there. Right. So it didn't really happen in a vacuum. Do you want to touch on
no. Yeah, it didn't happen in a vacuum at all. One of the best sources people can get a grasp on what was going on at the time is gosh darn it, the title's escaping me. I think it's Final Conflict. It's Nick Redfern's book.
Oh, yes.
In which he talks about the Collins elite.
Mm-hmm.
And when you combine that, what you learn in that book, with, and I talk about this in my book, Shimmering Light, with what was going on with the military in the post-World War II up to specifically 1952, you get a whole different view of 1947 specifically, because you learn exactly what the military and the FBI were finding out from Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons, I believe it was the FBI that he told about he and L. Ron Hubbard
Right.
what they were fooling around with when they were doing their working. Was it the Babylon working, I think? And
Yes.
they thought that they had opened a portal
Right.
and let something through. It just kind of puts a different spin on the whole traditional. Well, most people think in 1947 they go, well, of course Roswell, the ETs fell out of the sky, and again, when you look at the real details, not just the stuff in popular UFO literature of today, when you look at the real details, you get a different view of that, no less astonishing,
Yeah.
or no less magical, so to speak. But and here's the thing: you have a guy like Jack Parsons, who he was into high magic, he was into dark magic. He
Right.
was a student of Aleister Crowley at one time, for a while, the protege of Aleister Crowley, as we know.
Yeah.
And he got involved with Hubbard, the wonderful guy who started Scientology. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend Leo Remini's expose of Scientology. It'll disgust you and piss you off, but that I don't want to digress
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
But L. Ron Hubbard, remember, he was involved in this kind of magic as well, and
Right.
it was he and Parsons that were really involved together, who did this working, in which they were trying to create a moonchild and open up these portals. But just like the series Strange Angel that's running on CBS, for those who don't know, Jack Parsons was one of the founding geniuses of the American rocket program. One of the founders of essentially what is Jet Propulsion Laboratory. They were the guys who started it. They used to joke that JPL meant Jack Parsons Laboratory.
Right.
So this is one of our geniuses in our early days of our space program, who was also very much involved in the occult sciences. Most of your listeners probably know this, but there's a few out there that might not be aware of Jack Parsons, and they have all sorts of fun things to discover about him. But
No, the
he
background.
was.
Yeah, the background is appreciated. I've got a shot of him actually in action. That's him.
Yeah.
Right in one of these ceremonies. I mean, so just to bring home the point of what you're saying, wow,
Yeah. Here's one of our. He's got a security clearance, right?
Right.
He's very instrumental in helping our military develop, the rocket program, all this national security, national defense, and he's deeply into this magical stuff. It's again, I use the word delicious. It's great stuff. I mean, you just gotta love it. And so think about it. You had guys like him. Now he's the one we know about.
Right.
There were other guys, because there were guys in the early, days of the CIA, before it became CIA in 1947, National Security Act. These guys were also philosopher scientists. These guys were also, I believe it was Sidney Gottlieb, I think, was one of the MK Ultra scientists with CIA.
Oh, yeah.
And he was very much into the occult sciences and such. So, these are the kind of guys that were also our technological wizards, who were deeply embedded in our military industrial complex, which was greatly inspired and created with the Operation Paperclip Nazis, and is entirely what we call our military industrial complex, what President Eisenhower warned us about. Okay, this is based on the very model created by the Prussians 400 years prior. Okay, it's astonishing.
Wow.
And this is what NIMSA was, in a sense. And this is what they did to the United States. They knew that Germany, their precious German nation, was going to be defeated in the war. So the guys who operated with this Prussian method, they just applied the Prussian method of, okay, let's transplant it to the victor's country, in our case, the United States, and of course, Russia got some too. And let's just kind of root in there and take over by transforming the way they do business into the way we do business.
Right.
And these are the guys who were in the mix with Jack Parsons doing occult magic, while at the same time working at our very most secret bases and installations. And there, of course, is where Roswell happens.
Yes, yeah. Right in the heart of this. So you have the UFO file, you've got
Yeah.
this kind of mystery school
Mhm.
tradition, and then you have these people who are well versed in like Golden Dawn and well versed in
Yeah.
the esoteric tradition.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a major factor, and it's funny because if we go into it looking at that stuff without knowing anything about the mystery school or esoteric tradition, we're kind of lost because it's like, what are these guys doing? What are they up to? What are they aiming for?
Yeah, you have to know this stuff. You have to look at it. What comes to mind is one of the guys who had a foot in both the 19th century world of the NIMSA development, and all the airship weirdness, and the 20th century, and literally a Nazi Germany connection, was Walter Rathenau. Okay, now Walter Rathenau was associated with these philosopher scientists, with these theosophist guys and stuff. But he was also the guy who ran AEG, the German electrical company, the German engineering firm that did electro power and all that. That Wachowski's research and what we know about the bell, AEG was very much involved with the bell. So
Wow.
here we can connect through Rathenau the bell to these 19th century German occult philosopher scientists
Oh, that's
through
interesting.
Rathenau and AEG. There you go. See, that's just one thread.
Right.
And so this had been going on. The idea, what we're talking about in the late 40s, early 50s, of these philosopher, occultist scientists being involved with military technology, that had been going on for, in direct line for at least 50 years or more.
That is amazing. Wow, it's great to really put those together too. It makes a lot more sense in that context. Let's turn it over to Olivia for a minute. Olivia, how are we doing?
Good. I just want to get straight to the question I want to ask.
Okay.
Walter, what is the end game, in your opinion?
What is the end game of?
Well, the powers that have taken over this country.
Let's start with NIMSA. What's their end game?
Well, their end game is what really answers the question that she's asking, Olivia's asking, about what's going on today, because I see, here's the way I look at it. This is Walter's personal position on this. Globalism is a bad thing, okay? The collectivism is ultimately not a good thing for humankind.
Right.
I know the proponents of it tout all this. Oh, but we can have free this and free that, and we can live with the flowers and the bees, and it's a bunch of utopianist nonsense that has never worked. It's never gonna work, and it is always ultimately the tool of tyrants. Okay, so I see NIMSA. Okay, because
Especially
they come
since
out.
they're robo bees now. They're not even bees. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. See, I see NIMSA
Yep.
as really going the 19th century tie to what's going on in the 20th century with world banking, with the transhumanists. You mentioned, the technological advancement and this whole idea of the technological transhumanists, where we want to make humans, biological and technological beings to, enhance and expand their abilities. We want to, the idea of, we get this new world order, this one world government. Let's just bring everybody together under one, this big singular thing. This is hive mentality. This is collectivism. Why do they want to do this? Because it's so much easier to control the masses when you have everybody marching to the same drummer. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's an age-old story. It's, you always got this one guy or this one small group that wants to lord it over everybody else. Okay. And I see that as the end game. It's just the classic story of wanting to rule the world, so to speak. Now, here's where I think right now they're running into difficulties, because more and more people are onto this. So they're having to change their tactics up a little bit. You can see a little bit of desperation on that side, because some of their apparatchiks, some of their soldiers, as it were, or their face men, have been kind of smacked down a little bit. and things, for instance, in certain elections and stuff, didn't exactly go their way, the expected way.
Yeah.
And
So censorship.
yeah, and now throw in this next thing, throw in the fact that there are independent industrialists who are actually developing the means to go into outer space, having nothing to do with NASA, having nothing to do with the military, essentially potentially being the source for regular folks like you and I to eventually reach outer space, to get off this planet. So, and these guys who want to control things, they don't like that. They want access to, you get off the planet, theoretically, then you can go anywhere. And if you can go anywhere, you can get away from them and their control. So the end game really is just, the age-old story of, there's this group that wants to control everything. No, we don't want to be controlled. We could spend hours pointing, okay, this guy is likely in their camp, that guy is not. We could spend hours doing that. There's a lot of folks who do that. You've done a very good job with identifying some of the individuals. My focus has been, up till now for a while, the 19th century, and trying to get the big picture.
Oh yeah.
So that's my big picture view. Is again that this question leads into whole other conversations about today's politics and stuff, and I just I'll throw one thing out there and finishing my long thread of trying to answer that question. Here's the thing: no matter where you stand on the last presidential election in the U.S., no matter what side you're on, all I want to point out is it was kind of fun and very satisfying to see the two American political dynasties that have been controlling things for 30 years, okay? To see them looking like deer in the headlights. I've written about this elsewhere. Nobody runs for president that doesn't have, what I use the term mafia. Nobody runs for president that doesn't have some type of mafia behind them, okay? Right. And what I think happened in 2016 was whatever mafia is behind Trump is the match or had the upper hand, enough over the mafia running the Bushes and Clintons. Notice I said and, because I think those two dynasties are the different sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of startled them. I really do think it startled those two dynasties. They were like, whoa, wait a minute. This isn't supposed to happen. And so that gets really interesting. So I think what's going on here is, there is a struggle between these groups behind the scenes, and one of them just wants to control us, and the other one doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating you put it that way too. There's no question that there was a huge game change there, and we're still seeing the after effects of it. When the CIA goes out there and they're raging against the presidency and exposing that opposition to the presidency like they haven't really since JFK or Jimmy Carter. Yeah. I mean, we're in for a good time. Hey, my thing is, I'm just glad that Clinton and her Podesta UFO op didn't get to come off by getting
right. And is there? I mean, there's just a guy that just gives me the impression that he's a reprehensible human being. It's John Brennan. Former CIA guy. That guy just, but I won't go off on a tirade on that.
Wow.
But I despise John Brennan.
Listen,
and
hey, listen, I have an article where he says, we should go into that UFO thing. The drone king himself, he wants to go into the UFO file.
Yeah.
And his minions there are out there. The Elizondo types are out there now, and I know we could do a whole show on Elizondo, especially.
Gosh darn it, you mentioned Elizondo and I forgot. I should have I still have my bulletproof vest from my days in the field, and by golly, Elizondo's wearing his now when he speaks at UFO conferences. I feel like I should have had mine on sitting here, because you never know, they could be out to get us.
Bomb sniffing dogs next, they're coming.
Oh, for crying out loud, that is a circus over there.
Because he's letting out that incredible video from 2004 that's already bandied about YouTube for the last 10 years. So it's top secret, dude.
But how about those true believers?
Wow.
They really are just, let's see, I've been called a cranky, grumpy, old guy who is jealous of TTSA and Elizondo. It's just hilarious. And here's the funny thing. There's guys out there that are actually much more invested in the UFO field than I have been. And they're saying, wow, if he's being called that, what are we? I'm kind of on the edge of the UFO community. And, these true believers. And this is what, going back to, we're talking about the people that want to run things. This is the very kind of thing that they love. They love true believers. I see TTSA as a merchandise marketing cash grab that's being used for perception management. That's the way I see TTSA. And it's just the kind of thing that they've just got to be loving, these true believers in this.
Oh, absolutely. Well, what's interesting and why I think those types should give you kind of more cred on this is you were in the AFOSI. I mean, you understand intelligence speak. You were deep in the heart of that. You know how these things operate. When you see someone like Elizondo, you can spot the little things that he's doing, like when he comes out and says, the work I was doing was secret, not secret, and it will be classified but unclassified.
Oh, yeah, it's this double speak. And look, I'm telling you, I've said it before, I'll say it again. There is every reason to suspect, as much as there is, no reason, there's no reason not to suspect that just because the man is retired from being a staff CIA employee, there is no reason to assume he's still not employed by them as a contractor. He could be working an undercover contract. Yeah. Okay? I'm telling you this. My foot is stomping loudly.
Yeah.
Okay? Elizondo could I'm not saying he is. What I'm saying is, based on my personal experience in the intel community for 18 years, I'm telling you, he could very easily be a contract undercover operational employee. Okay? And still, that's how he would be doing perception management. That's how he would be serving their needs and objectives while involved with TTSA. And look who else is in there. You've got Kit Green, CIA guy.
Right. This is a CIA operation. Forget it. Straight up.
Well, what cracks me up is, prior to TTSA, if they even suspected you were CIA, right? You were demonized. You were, but now it's like, they've got
secret move on. Hey.
Yeah, you're like, this was former CIA. These are the good guys. And this crap that, because he cares about the people knowing the truth about UFOs, give me a break. Wow. Okay? It's but remember, I'm jaded and jealous. What's that?
Right. He's got to wear that vest proudly. I mean, he's putting his life in his hands.
What I see them.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. What I see them doing is they say a lot of not really saying anything.
Yes.
Or when they do try to say something, so far it has come out and bitten them on the butt.
Yeah.
Like the balloon UFO, okay, or the Tic Tac thing.
Oh,
and no matter how many times you point out and you go through the details showing why that's BS, the true believers will come at you and they'll just say, well, that's your opinion. That's your opinion. You're jaded. I know you are, but what am I? My dad can kick your dad's butt on the playground. That's what it reduces to.
Wow.
And so you're not going to win with them. But
I had a question for you on this.
Sure.
There's a picture now. It's out there. It's in the public. It's confirmed. It's a picture of Elizondo in 2010 running a shipping company. Now, I'm very curious about this because in 2010, he's supposed to be running this ATIP program, which, by the way, no one could find any real evidence for ATIP. So, we have Harry Reid saying, oh, yeah, we spent $22 million in this program, but you have people tackling around, going through FOIA requests, looking for AA tip, and the name doesn't appear anywhere. But interestingly enough, there he is in 2010, and there's a whole article on him in like a hometown newspaper saying Luis Elizondo and his partner with a shipping company in 2010. Now, he's supposed to be running that desk. What is it about this picture that I'm not getting? Is there some kind of disconnect there? I mean, could you run the secret UFO desk and run a shipping company at the same time?
We got the options here. Okay, either. Which is interesting. For the first time, I'm hearing an echo, which could suggest that maybe we're being paid attention to by a particular organization because we're talking about Elizondo and CIA. I'll say it clearly, so that the NSA can get it, clear.
I can still hear you perfectly, so you're good.
Okay, good. Okay. Here's the thing. Either Elizondo is full of crap and he's making this up. Now, he's either making it up for ego purposes or he's making it up because it's what he's supposed to do working undercover. Okay. If he's not making it up, that he was running the ATIP desk, whatever it was really called, then the shipping company thing could have been an operation that he was running under shallow cover, what they call shallow cover.
Okay.
For instance, for a while I worked shallow cover for the FBI. Actually, for most of my time with the FBI, I worked shallow cover. What does that mean? I had a wallet with my various things in it that under a different identity, but I would go home every night as Walter Bosley. I wasn't like, living it 24/7 and away from home for months at a time, like a really deep undercover guy would go.
Okay.
It was shallow cover. So he could have even been using his real name, Luis Elizondo, running this shipping company in 2010. If this were some type of shallow cover operation, what they often call a front, right? So that there's one possibility. The other possibility is that maybe he was already a contractor by 2010. There's all sorts of possibilities that fit within the reality of being associated with CIA. So what I'm saying is he could have still genuinely very much been affiliated with CIA.
Yeah.
But depending upon the details of his employment, could have been running a legitimate shipping company.
Right. Wow. It's so interesting. And my first question that came to mind, well, what was he really shipping?
There you go. See, that's what's up with that. I would say that they probably, if they had a brick and mortar location, they probably had their share of people coming in and actually shipping things like they do, like furniture or books or personal items or something, while mixed in there would have been whatever their operational activity would have been if it were indeed operational. But yeah, it is interesting that we have him running a regular civilian shipping company in a year that he's supposed to be running this very important desk.
Right. Exactly.
Which is it? Because, when you're a staff employee, you're not exactly supposed to be out there having articles done about you.
Okay. See, that's an excellent point, I think.
It's not forbidden in all cases, but it's still kind of sensitive who you work for.
Okay. I like that. Right from the, you've been in that system, you understand how it works, and I think that's important. Olivia, you're up.
Okay. David Tormina says, at this point, doesn't it feel like off-world powers are suppressing this technology?
That's a hypothesis. We don't have, any proof of that. It's possible, but I would say I would turn the off-world players into breakaways. The idea of these independent breakaway organizations, which have the financial and material resource means to have great influence through banking or whatever on politicians and what happens in open industry that we're aware of. But if you mean, I'm assuming that off planet means extraterrestrial.
I'm thinking. I'm thinking that's how he's used it there. But that's a good point, which is, it's good. Actually, it's a good rule, I think, to adopt, to always look earthbound first to see what groups could be operating this kind of stuff. even some of the things that we talked about with the mystery schools, you're talking about small groups also that break away with their own technology that are outside of the reach, the kind of extraterritorial forces. That's interesting. Okay, Olivia, what else you got?
Alba Nigra, Walter, in your research, can you identify where the Prussians got their ideas from?
Well, like I said, the 19th century Prussians, this dates back, 300 or 400 years. It goes back to the Teutonic Knights. Now, remember, we have research into the Templars demonstrating that they obtained some type of knowledge which led to great material wealth and political power, okay? And it was based on something they discovered or captured during the Crusades. Now, during the Fourth Crusade, I believe it was, where that funny thing happened on the way to the Middle East, where they decided, let's not go to the Middle East, let's just sack Constantinople. And they sacked the Eastern Roman Empire's version of the Library of Alexandria, which had all sorts of knowledge, of the day, the advanced technology, and certain ancient secrets and stuff. And the Teutonic Knights were among the beneficiaries of that information from the Fourth Crusade. Now, the Prussian guys that we're talking about, these were guys who had this political idea already where they knew they wanted to, sometime down the road, unite these Prussian states into one German nation. And they wanted to control it. But they didn't want just that. They wanted to control all of Europe. And these particular Prussians, in wanting to control all of Europe, they started the idea and used the idea of unifying Germany so that then they would have a powerful unified nation to use to then take over Europe. This was their goal dating back, 4 or 5 centuries, okay? And they used the Teutonic Knights and whatever wealth and knowledge that they had captured or been the beneficiaries of after the Fourth Crusade to, at first, they were the material supporters of the Knights, okay? The Knights were running the show, and these Prussian agro-industrialists, other kind of industrialists, political kind of guys, noblemen, what they did was they said, oh yes, Teutonic Knights, you're the guys. And then when they outnumbered them and had done their Machiavellian things to outmaneuver them, then they kind of pushed the Teutonic Knights aside and they started their own thing. And this continued on into the 19th century when they finally were able to unify Germany. And then this idea, as I said before, and I say in my books, continued on to where they were really the force and the power behind the rise of the Nazi Party and Nazi Germany.
Wow.
And even then, their attitude was, let's use this Germany thing as far as it'll go. And, when Germany got its butt kicked because of all this, they said, okay, now we'll take our idea and we'll transplant it throughout the world. In the case of the United States, it was transplanted via Operation Paperclip, and its product was our military-industrial complex.
This interesting threads back through time. Olivia, we only have time for a couple more. So
okay, well, this can wrap it up because it's pretty big. Kay Tower says, are we still dealing today with warring mystery schools that went underground after the fall of Atlantis or whatever, and have been at war to win our consciousness ever since? DJ and I earlier were listening to another interview of yours where you were talking about there are 2 breakaway civilizations. I'm wondering where the mystery schools fit in with that theory.
Well, as I said earlier, the guys in these that established these breakaway civilizations that we talk about, these groups like NIMSA and what I call the 1903, remember, these guys were all definitely students of various mystery schools. So it's not the mystery schools themselves. It's their students. It's certain products of the mystery schools, certain students, graduates, adherents to these mystery schools, who they themselves as individuals get certain political ideas and have certain socio-political philosophies. And what they do is they of course take what they learn through the mystery schools and bastardize it or adapt it to their personal social philosophies. Okay, so it comes back to individuals, who then will create an organization that they can use as their power arm, as their hammer, or whatever, to bring into effect their particular philosophies and ideas. And here's the thing, big picture view, they have patience. They have, a big view it's multi-generational. If it takes them 100 years to do something, they'll take that 100 years to do it. We used to say in the intelligence, the national security community, that, the Chinese were that way. What the Russians and we and England, by golly, expect and want to accomplish in a period of 5 years, the Chinese are happy taking 50 or 500 because, they look at the long-term goal. And that's why I think many people see this as a mystery school thing, because they're willing to apply their objectives across multiple generations. In fact, they're patient. They realize they're not going to accomplish all this maybe in their own lifetimes. So what they try to do is accomplish as much as they can push through in their lifetimes. But because these guys were all, even their opposition, the good guys, were all students of these same mystery schools, and they learned certain knowledge, people tend to say, well, it's the mystery schools that are bad. It's Freemasonry that's bad. It's when actually every time when you look closer, it always comes down to certain little groups of like-minded individuals who use
Breaking off. Yes.
And wanting to do their own thing.
Absolutely. That's fascinating too, because, and when you mention, if we get into Atlantis, that advanced technology, if you go to the work of Rudolf Steiner, if you go to the work of Blavatsky, if you go to Edgar Cayce's work, they're all agreed the advanced technology existed back there, and they had a big blowout and it went underground. Which kind of, that tradition eventually that picks it up over time probably lands right in the middle of your NIMSA research, actually.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in fact, in one of the books, I go into, where did NIMSA, the 19th century, where did they come from? Yeah. And it goes, I take it, I through my analysis and my speculations, I take it all the way back to, the antediluvian times, that mysterious pre-flood era that's so murky in our past.
Right.
So it ties into Anunnaki. For instance, I see there's two Anunnaki concepts. The one with the capital A is a specific culture of the ones with the small a. For instance, you and I and everybody, we're all human beings, okay? But not all of us are Japanese or Russian or Brazilian, right? And the way I look at it is there were different Anunnaki beings, like like we would be human beings, who came to this planet, okay? But they came with different goals and objectives. They were rivals of each other, okay? They were Anunnaki small a, the same way we're human beings, but they were capital A Anunnaki versus another group in their objectives and reasons for being here and their designs upon Earth-based human beings. And I take my NIMSA thread back to that era.
Wow. Yeah.
I try to.
Yeah, I can see it too. It's interesting. There's a Cayce reading, and I think Cayce gave incredible information on Atlantis, probably the best. But one of the readings he has, someone asked him, can you describe these, Atlantean ships that they had, the flying machines? And he said, oh, they're such as Ezekiel described at a much later date. Now, that always fascinated me because I was thinking, well, here's Ezekiel much later experiencing and interfacing with these craft. And then Cayce's basically saying, yeah, it's not God he's meeting out there. It's this Atlantean ship.
And remember Ezekiel with the wheels within the wheels. Yes. Look at the 1890s airship mystery. The witnesses who got to go on board or were told about these things and describe what they saw in many cases, wheels and spinning and rotation and torsion, right?
Yes.
So there's always this round spinning thing that, what does that sound like? Wheels within wheels that,
Yes.
a guy in biblical times, that would be the only way he could describe it. And yeah, that's interesting that what I like is, what Ezekiel described many years later, which, it's like, okay, so these Atlanteans had this like way before Ezekiel's time.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
there's
cool
not,
stuff.
and a lot of people in the Ancient Aliens bunker try to just say, well, the Ezekiel thing, it's aliens. But you know what? Advanced Atlanteans having that technology and keeping it over time. Well, this is what Ezekiel just happens to bump into it. I thought that was fascinating. Okay, Olivia, the last question for tonight.
Well, it's my question. So again, I'm going to go back to the end game. Catherine Austin Fitts has concluded that there's a plan for depopulation. I know it's a heavy question, but I, after doing all my research, I agree with her, and it chills me to the bone. And I'm just wondering what you think about it.
Is NIMSA up to depopulation?
Well, to the extent that they were involved with, and this is something the New Age folks today don't like to hear, but within the circles of spiritualists, theosophists, and the New Agers of those days, you had the people that were influencers on, you had George Bernard Shaw, who, in my opinion, was just again, that word reprehensible that I used earlier about John Brennan. To me, George Bernard Shaw was an a-hole, but and I talk about him in my books. I give the show the reasons. But when you look at what, let's look at what Margaret Sanger, some of her beliefs, that it was okay to, we should eliminate this ethnicity or that. She really.
Yeah.
She really supported these things, no matter what modern day folks want to say about what a big hero she was. She really was a proponent of, this kind of, ethnic cleansing of humanity. And, these are the kinds of people that you find involved with, these themes that, boy, if we could, like, there's the Georgia Guidestones. I think that's the source now. That there it is. It says bring it down to what, 500 million.
Yes.
But, I mean, it's like go pound sand. Whoever carved that, whoever paid for that. Yeah,
well, you get 7.5 billion now, right? So if you have to get rid of 7 billion to bring it down to 500 million. That's
well, here's the thing with the my view of the overpopulation scare. Okay, with the technology we have, come on, anyone who's lived in Southern California, there was a time in the big picture of history, it wasn't long ago, that the Los Angeles Valley and all of Southern California, it's just a big desert. Okay, stealing water from north of them turned it into this place where millions of people live.
Yeah.
Now, if they could do that with 1930s technology, right? With the technology we have today, we have these vast areas of the earth that are just empty. Okay, we are not overpopulated. That's just a popular tool of the collectivists who have an objective of controlling everybody. Okay, oh, we're overpopulated. It's like, you know what? Use the technology to reclaim the land that we're not using, and there's plenty of space for everybody to spread out. Stop motivating people to live crowded, in crowded cities. Oh, we all got to live on top of each other. No, we don't have to live on top. We'll all get along a lot better if we would, kind of throw into the trash can the idea of the huge cosmopolis that millions have to live on top of each other. Let's spread out a little bit. We certainly have the technology to make this happen. And so you got to look at the political motivation behind, population control and ideas similar to that. And you usually find one when you, and it's not that you're making it up. You scratch the surface and you find that there is a socio-political motive behind these altruistic ideas, like,
right.
But yeah, I would say through the medical technology, through the like, for instance, cancer treatment being an industry instead of curing it.
Yes. Oh yeah.
and all the other things with the medical industry. Yeah, I would say if not a definite sinister plan consciously to wipe people out, I would say that happening as a side product, the powers that be, they probably shrug and go, oh, okay, one way or another. People get tired of war. We'll just let them die off from disease, and we'll get our way either way. I think that's the way they look at it.
Yeah, that's just the kind of cynicism. Walter, fantastic stuff. The book series, the Empire of the Wheel book series, incredible research, and I think the ripples from that research are just going out, and people are picking up on it every day. Is your latest book Shimmering Light?
Yeah, the last one I came out with is Shimmering Light, which is, of course, I investigate. I dive into my dad's weird story in which he was briefed about Roswell, and he was involved with a UFO crash retrieval in Arizona in 1958.
We're going to bring you. Yeah, we're going to bring you on to do a show on Shimmering Light. That's fascinating stuff.
Oh, great. I would love to talk more about that. That one for the last year, I've been working with a TV producer. He wants to turn that into a reality series where we go out and follow through on the leads that my dad left, because my dad died in 2008, and just kind of go out there in the field and see what we can find out about what's in there. But Empire of the Wheel, of course, is currently being
that's going to you're making that a series.
Well, yeah, it's been optioned and is being put together and developed, hopefully to be a dramatic series here. So I'm real excited about that.
It's perfect. It's perfect for that, and that's very exciting. And it took them long enough to get around to it.
Well, the first one came out in 2011, so that was only 7 years ago, and then the other two are out there. But yeah, so those good things are happening. I'm not living in a mansion yet, but it's nice to be recognized and noticed.
Absolutely. Well, when the TV series debuts, we'll do a live show on how you feel about it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I'm going to love it, because the producer, she's sharp, she's brilliant, she has a great vision for this, and I'm real excited to see what she puts together.
The books are at lulu.com.
Yes.
That's where you can find them. And Olivia, you get the last one.
I wanted to ask Walter, are you going to be able to be in the series yourself and act in it?
Yeah.
No. They probably, here's the thing. And as much as I love Harlan Ellison, I am no Harlan Ellison. I know I'm just going to sit back and smile and love whatever they do. I will say that I don't want to. I'll just give you a little teaser. The things that I experienced and encountered and did in my Empire of the Wheel investigation that are not mentioned at all in any of the books will find their way into the show. And I'll just leave it at that.
Nice.
I'm just going to leave it at that until I'm allowed to talk more about it.
Yeah, it sounds great. Well, you have to at least get a cameo in there, I think.
My name is going to be on there, right? My name will be in the credits, and
the books are amazing stuff. The Empire of the Wheel series, if somebody hasn't started there, that's where you want to start. I think that's incredible work. And so much information about NIMSA and Del Show, just off the charts. Walter, it's great to have you here. And thanks so much for being with us. Olivia?
Walter, you were fantastic tonight. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. As long as I didn't bore anybody or disappoint, I'm happy.
No, you did great. And we'll have you back on. We'll do a Shimmering Light show sometime in the fall for sure.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to it. And I now have this. I have this program locked in on my computer, so we'll be able to log right in.
We have to do a show blasting the TTSA. I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah, that's
thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be back. We have a special show, 2-hour broadcast on Monday, Labor Day, and we're doing it at 5 p.m. So all of our European viewers will get a chance to get a crack at the show a little bit earlier. The show is on Tua de Danann, and watch out, because this show is going to be off the charts, Ireland in Atlantis. So our Irish viewers, please check it out, and we want your feedback special on that. We have a lot of international viewers like Esther in Hungary and Linda in Sweden, and Carly in the UK, who was with us tonight. And so it's great. You guys, this will really be a good show for you. In the US, of course, it's Labor Day. So there we are. It was fantastic having Walter Bosley with us tonight. His book series is Empire of the Wheel. Highly recommend everyone check it out. And Olivia, that leaves you.
Well, I had a great time tonight. Thanks, everybody.
You did great, but your questions were off the charts too, along with everyone else. Thank you so much. Nicholas is out there. It's great to see you. Christine Taggart, a cult fan and a cult priestess. It's terrific. The questions were really great tonight. We ran long tonight because we got Walter on late, but wow, we really came through, and all of the threads are there. Come back with us Monday. It's episode 25 of the X Steganography series, and we will be here. The only question left for Miss Olivia, by the way, you did great, is what's for dinner?
Tonight it's going to be, well, I don't know what I'm going to eat, but I'm going to have a nice big glass of lemonade with a shot of tequila.
Hey, lemonade and tequila. I think that's some kind of mystery school remedy. We'll have to figure out a name for that one. But we will see everyone on Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Okay, I'm looking forward to seeing everyone there. Go to the darkjournalist.com website, sign up for the newsletter, get behind the show, subscribe to it, and we will see you on Monday. And by the way, we have an incredible fall lined up for you guys on the X series, so we're looking forward to it. Thank you for joining us.
Good night, everybody.
Le mot.